You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And of course, if you guys have been watching us on these previous Mondays, we have been delving deeply into what Star Wars actually is, why it's a cultural phenomenon. But even beyond that, we've really been taking a look at what makes Star Wars Star Wars. And of course, we started this out, I don't know, like 2-3 weeks ago, something like that, with The Legacy, where we looked at George Lucas's vision. We talked about some of the storytelling devices that were used in order to make this very unique project called Star Wars. And then, of course, we started right away just dissecting the movies because, of course, I mean, if you want to know what Star Wars is, for a long time, it was just films. And so you got to start dissecting the film. So, of course, we started with The New Hope, and then last Monday, we did The Empire Strikes Back. Tonight, PowerPoint in hand, we've got Return of the Jedi, to where we're pretty much, with you guys, just going to talk about this film, the third chronological release in the Star Wars series. Came out in May of 1983, and we're pretty much just going to break this movie down and maybe not do a play-by-play so much, because, I mean, honestly, I think if you've been around more than a few years, you've probably seen this movie a couple hundred times.
And if you haven't, you know, it's always there on Disney Plus for you.
It is. It really is. And I mean, honestly, I should say that this is probably, and we probably should have mentioned this last time, actually, it's a better idea to watch these movies before you watch our episodes. Because we're basically going to assume that you guys have seen this stuff. You know, this is not really a show for somebody who's, you know, maybe never seen it and like, hey, I think I'll go check this out. You know, a bunch
of spoiler alerts.
There are going to be spoilers. And, you know, also, we're going to jump around. I mean, even though, unlike last week, so for The New Hope, we did have somewhat of a presentation where we basically took different chunks. Because for A New Hope, and again, if you guys missed any of this stuff, it's on the channel. All you got to do is go back. We have a What is Star Wars playlist. You can check out any of the videos in this series. But we actually began this thing talking about, you know, like the basic characters, breaking it down. We often talk about the hero's journey. We talk about, you know, Joseph Campbell's writings. We talk about really a lot of stuff. So even though we delved into A New Hope, you can't really delve into A New Hope without really breaking down all the elemental things that make Star Wars what it is. But with Empire Strikes Back, so for that one, we didn't really have any kind of any slides or anything like that. But this one we do. But it's still going to be handled in pretty much the same way. We're going to be bouncing around a little bit, basically, you know, doing pretty much
our exposition on various aspects of the movie.
That's right. And of course, Ronaldo's with us. It's like, what's up, Gungan Warriors? Okay, this is the wrong trilogy.
Right.
Actually,
it's good to have Ronaldo back, man. I haven't seen him in a while.
It is good to have Ronaldo back. It's always good to have Ronaldo back. But I mean, a spoiler alert, right? Next week should be The Phantom Menace, if I'm not mistaken, right? We're going to go back and do the prequel trilogies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, you're a week early, but yes, you know, that's going to happen. So, I mean, pretty much before we really start getting into the whole, you know, slideshow presentation, you saw Return of the Jedi pretty much the same way that you saw the other stuff, right? Because your uncle introduced you to it.
Yep.
And then you basically watched them in succession. Is that how it worked?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I was the poor guy that saw all this stuff in real time back when it was released. So I actually had to wait 3 years. 3 very painful years in between each of the releases. But this this is the payoff because it's always cool to see the third movie in any trilogy because obviously they're wrapping stuff up, right? I mean, the first movie of a trilogy is usually they're introducing you to the story or whatever, and then the second act is usually kind of like, your heroes are in peril and it's a little bit darker in tone. These are generalities, but they do happen to actually pertain to this trilogy. And then, of course, third movie in the trilogy, we get the payoff. And we really got the payoff in this film. So, overall...
Yeah, I love this. I love this particular shot. It's every time I see it, I laugh because this is one of my father and I, we always say this is like our father-son picture. Because my dad's a huge Star Wars fan as well as my grandfather. And so whenever my dad wants to make some reference to me being just like him, he always throws this back up as, almost like saying this is us. Of course, I feel like some days I'm more Darth than Luke, but
well, and I mean, I think that a lot of it too has to do, it's funny because one of the reasons why I chose this, and actually, I basically chose this one as the thumbnail for this episode, believe it or not, because there's so many different things that you could have put, and there's some things that are pretty much cliched. Like almost anybody that deals with Return of the Jedi, you see various repetitive pictures from the movie that come up. But really, when you encapsulate this, excuse me, it's really about these two guys at the end of the day.
Definitely.
Because the whole saga, right? It's about really the prequels, and of course we'll go into this beginning next week, but the prequels were really about Anakin's rise and fall. And then, of course, this trilogy is about Luke's rise and, as we see later, Anakin's redemption. So really, it's the Skywalker saga, and it's called that for a reason. And so, yeah, I think it's fair to say that what I was really looking for was that whole scene which of course I'm sure we're going to get to, in tonight's episode, where they're basically in the, I don't know, they just left a Skywalker and they're kind of in that corridor.
Oh, that little, on that bridge between that and the AT-AT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where it's one of those scenes that it's the first time that you actually see any vulnerability in Vader, which I thought was just incredible.
Masterfully done. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's really a conversation. It's the first time where, it's not really any threats that are made. It's really Vader just kind of laying it on the line. Like, look, man, this is just kind of the way it has to go. It's, I mean, we're not trying to be that guy.
Battles and
right.
Stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a quieter moment. And I think that that's one of the things honestly, it's probably my favorite scene of the entire film, to be honest.
I could definitely see that.
And I think I even felt that way when I saw it. Because it's really, you never really see Vader that way before. It's the first time, like I said, you see him show any kind of a vulnerability. I wouldn't say weakness, but vulnerability. And so I really just think that, when you hone in on this thing, that, I don't know, it's just really cool. So yeah, so you basically were able to watch these things in succession, which I always think is really curious because that obviously changes things in a way. It's almost even today when you watch a series from week to week versus when you can just binge the whole thing. And there's pluses and minuses to both. So I don't know, before we start getting into the actual real deep dive here, what were your overall thoughts on this compared to the other two?
So I love A New Hope. A New Hope was really cool. I love the action in it as a kid. Once again, I'm like 7 to 8 years old, looking at this thing. So A New Hope was really fascinating to me. I really love the story of it. And then we get to Empire. and I don't think I watched them all like in the same day. It may have been over the course of 3 days. I might have watched, each film. And Empire, I remember it was very dark. I remember it kind of creeped me out a little bit. Like Vader was definitely merciless, at least to my little 8-year-old mind. And it was definitely like kind of like, man, this is really interesting and kind of creepy and scary, just the whole vibe of it. Even with meeting Yoda for the first time, he's on the swamp planet, it's kind of murky, and then, Luke going into the cave, that was creepy. It was a lot of creepy little elements for me as a kid, and it was very dark. But when I get to Return of the Jedi, um it had its moments, it's like, okay, I had a cool rescue at the very beginning, with Luke coming to rescue Han from Jabba, and that was really awesome. And to see the growth in Luke, right? When we last saw him, he had his hand lopped off and he had a replacement hand put on, but then now, you see him more seasoned as when we first get a glimpse of him this time, it's like, okay, like he's filled into manhood at this point, and he's confident. You could tell there's a different a swag about him in a way. Uh, from the time, even when he met the Gamorrean guard, and he comes up and he chokes him immediately, just at a simple wave of his hand. You're just like, oh, this Luke is different. Like, he's not playing games. So yeah, I really loved it. I really loved, like you said, that whole bridge scene between Vader and Luke was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the deepening of the bond between Han and Leia was really nice.
Yeah, that's actually a
Um,
good point too. I mean, that was another thing that was really important that I was I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about this now, but I was really excited when this movie came out. Well, first of all, when we last see Han Solo, he's frozen in carbonite. So, there was a whole thing about is he going to get out or not? And I remember there were rumors. One of my friends came up to me and said, "Oh yeah, they're actually going to do two new Star Wars films. The first one's going to be called Revenge of the Jedi, and then they're going to release another one called The Return of Han Solo, where they were going to really split it up into two." And there was some official, I don't know how you want to put this, but like I guess support for this theory. Now, the other thing, and this is probably where it came from, in doing some of the research, because I mean, again, I've lived with these movies for decades, so there's not a whole lot out there that I can really find out that's new about, especially the original trilogy. But one thing that did surprise me, I knew there was some contract negotiations between Harrison Ford and Lucasfilm, and they were really unsure whether or not he was going to return. And that's actually part of the reason why character-wise, they encased him in carbonite, because if he didn't return, then you could just write this off as, oh, well, okay, he just kind of stays in carbonite and on Jabba's wall forever, and we just move on with the rest of the characters. But in a way, it really kind of deepened the mystery behind what was going to happen in this film, because if you remember how you left Empire Strikes Back, it's pretty dark, it was pretty grim, and you really didn't know what was going to happen to the heroes. However, once we found out that Harrison Ford was actually going to do the film, you knew, I mean, he's not going to play his carbonite body, right? So you knew he was going to get out. And pretty much like you, I thought the same thing. I was really looking forward to, I guess, the further adventures or romance or whatever of Han and Leia. I was really looking to see where that was going to go. Before we go any further, let me just sneak Ronaldo in here. He says, overall, this is the one I loved most as a kid. Today, I think it's great, but it's the weakest one. And it's interesting because so most people universally agree that Empire Strikes Back is the greatest of the Star Wars films, even to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Most people. Some people who you guys might know that are famously not feeling that way would be somebody like John Campea, who actually puts Return of the Jedi as his
Yeah.
favorite. And so
Mhm.
you do get some of those. So it's always interesting to me because we're dealing with that movie now. It's interesting
Mhm.
how many people actually put that above all the other ones. And I can sort of understand why. It's probably the most fun. You know, as much as A New Hope is a brilliant film, I always hate the watching stuff again to where the characters all have to meet each other again. It's
Mhm.
you're always happy once you get a really good group of people. They already know each other. You can see their further adventures. So with Return of the Jedi, you basically get this really fun film with all the people, and this is one of the few where again everybody goes, "Oh, Han, Luke, and Leia, and all that." If you really stop and think about it, they didn't have that many adventures together. They spent most of Empire Strikes Back completely separated.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and as a kid, if you would have asked me which was my favorite, I would have definitely said Return of the Jedi was my favorite. Um, it wasn't until I got older and I really started to appreciate what Empire really was.
Hmm.
Um, I think, and I'm with you on that. Like that's the whole thing about a trilogy, right? The first you got to kind of get to know the characters, and it's kind of like that way with Harry Potter, right? You got Harry has to meet up with all his friends at Hogwarts, and okay, you got to figure out who's the bad guy, who's this, who's that, who's a friend, who's not, and then you kind of have to find the villain. What's their plan on vanquishing the villain? And that's the gig. And then, of course, the further adventures, of course, because now you can open things up. That's why I always love, even with the Avengers movie, right? The first Avengers movie, we all knew the characters because they kind of had their own individual films. But now you have to see them come together as a cohesive unit, and now they have to kind of all meet each other for the first time and solve the problem. But the Avengers movies get more interesting and more fun, of course, because now after the first one's out of the way, they all kind of reasonably gotten to know each other over the course of time. And so then now when you do the second Avengers and the third one, it's like it's way more fun because you don't have all this uneasiness with the characters as now everybody's kind of doing their own thing.
Well, that's a good
And
point because they're beginning to trust each other. So there are some ensemble films to where, yeah, the characters aren't just meeting for the first time, but they've got to, get past all their untrustworthiness and I mean all that stuff. Any I guess shakiness as far as really
hmm
committing to these guys. And I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I begin to wonder though, there's times where I think that you can have a film, and I can't think of one offhand. I really wish I could, but there's some, and I guess A New Hope sort of follows this, even though they do take a while to actually get to know each other. But A New Hope was a good example of where everybody, yeah, there was a little bit of rough around the edges kind of a thing where they didn't fit together like a perfect puzzle piece, but you basically got the idea, like, okay, once they got together, they were a fairly cohesive unit. I don't think that it wasn't like how Andor ended up being, right? Where these guys are like
right.
shoved together and I mean, for just I mean, I don't know if they ever really well, they didn't really because half of they're killing each other. I mean, it got really crazy after a while. So that part was nice. Ronaldo says, "Have you seen Luke's deleted scene where he built his lightsaber?" Yes. Um,
We're
I did
probably gonna be
not put.
talking about that a little bit.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. I didn't really, I didn't really include that in our thing because again, there's a lot to Return of the Jedi. Honestly, like I was halfway through putting the presentation together, going, I don't know if I really want to do this, man. There's a lot, a lot of stuff. There's a lot of work, to be honest. I mean,
hmm
look, YouTube's not our full time job here. I mean, that would be wonderful if we could just make a living off
Absolutely.
of this show, but until we get to that point, this is a lot of extra work for us. So, not a complaint, mind you, just kind of putting
Just
it out
saying.
there. Yeah, just saying. Just saying. Look, guys. But, I mean, I guess we could get right into it, really, because, when this thing opens, you really start to see, I think, the power of the Empire. I think that Lucas did a really good job of establishing the overall might of the Empire at this point. I mean, a lot of people point to the fact that The Empire Strikes Back was probably their zenith of power. Other people feel like around the time of Solo or Obi-Wan, that was kind of their zenith of power. And look, that's debatable. We could probably have a discussion about that, certainly. But I think, you look at this scene, I mean, let's put it this way. Up until this point in the trilogy, this is probably the most show of force that we've seen in the Empire thus far. Because again, you have to remember, we're reviewing these movies that came out in the late 70s, early 80s. This came out in May of 83. You have to try to forget everything that you guys have seen up until this point, right? So you have to think about how things have been slowly revealed to us as time has gone on. And this is the first time, we're seeing the Royal Guards for the first time in this film. So, and there's a whole conversation between Vader and that one high-ranking officer, and then, of course, he utters the lines, the Emperor is not as forgiving as I am. And, you're thinking back to when he was choking everybody every 5 minutes in The Empire Strikes Back. And you're like, well, how much worse is he then? Because, again, we're setting this up, right? Because ultimately, obviously, and we'll get to this later, but this is going to be the first time that we actually see Palpatine. I mean, granted, yes, I know that we saw him in a hologram in The Empire Strikes Back, but this is the first time where the Emperor plays a prominent character role in any of the films.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of, I would kind of disagree with you as far as the show of force from the Empire, because I think they've done it all throughout. I just think this in different stages. Because honestly, in A New Hope, I mean, the fact that you have this moon-sized battle station that blows planets out of the galaxy, I mean, it's a considerable amount of force. When you think about, like, they got the big gun literally, and
Yeah, and
when
I
you
mean,
see that, you're like, okay,
right.
and this is
But this is the first time that you see like a bunch.
no, I'm just saying, like, on scale, like, I get what you're saying, like, when you say it. That's why I say I mildly disagree. Just so it's kind of semantical in a way,
No, I mean,
because
you're right. I mean, yeah, if you got a weapon that destroys a planet, I mean, look, this film, they're building another one. It's bigger.
right, and so right, and so when you see the first Death Star, okay, it's like, all right, this thing could, we saw knock out Alderaan, I was like, okay. Then when you get to Empire, here's another show, a massive show of forces when you see, like, okay, these guys have snow troopers. They got these giant walking camel things, the AT-ATs. They're walking through and they're just picking off, like, even the rebels that got these their snow speeders or whatever. But there's half of them are still no match for the Empire. I mean, their blasters can't even penetrate their armor. I mean, you just really see the dominance of the Empire at this point, like, all along the way. And then when we finally get to Return to the Jedi, to the scene that you have up, now we see the scale of, and that's still not everybody, because you're missing biker scouts, you're missing all these, and that we later see on in the film, but you just see, like, a fraction of the mass of the Empire,
Well, and
and
I
that's
think
still
that,
massive.
yeah, and I think that a lot of it just like has to do with the fact that when you see the opening scene to where the Empire is just, well, at least, and again, look, this is only one Star Destroyer, right? I mean, it's Vader's. Well, Vader's Star Destroyer was actually destroyed at the end of, the end of. Wait a minute,
Return of the Jedi.
was it at the end of this film? Yeah, I guess it was,
Yep.
wasn't it? Yep.
Hmm.
So it was still alive and well. Um, Before I get to that, let's get to Ronaldo. He says the second Death Star is my biggest problem. I never understood why they built it again. I understand why they built it again. The thing that really kind of blew my mind though is why is it bigger? I mean, it's funny. I was watching a while ago. I was watching another YouTuber that was talking about Return of the Jedi. Ironically enough, and it's kind of like, it's a little strange that it's, again, he was actually dissecting it, talking about how Return of the Jedi was actually the first that was more derivative. And he's not wrong. There's a lot of, a lot of people talk about how The Force Awakens was derivative. Return of the Jedi did its fair share. R2D2 and C3PO walking the terrain of Tatooine. They did that again. Luke and Leia swinging from something, and New Hope it's across a bridge, and here it's across, when they're attacking the sail barge. So, and it goes on. I'm not going to deal with it too much here because I'm sure we're going to cover some of that anyway later on, but this is the first movie where it starts to be like that. And it's the same thing. It's kind of like what The Force Awakens did. Oh, let's build a bigger version or something like that. But it's kind of like, okay, the first one could destroy a planet. So what benefit other than maybe holding more people is it going to be? But getting directly to Ronaldo's question, and of course, Daryl, I'll let you weigh in on this too, but I mean, it's really not surprising. First of all, you have to remember that Palpatine's plan was to build a ton of these things. It was never meant to be just one. That's one of the things that more or less carried over. The EU actually borrowed from Lucas, but the idea, because obviously, if you look at how much of this thing was built, it wasn't like they built it in between New Hope and now. I mean, the thing's obviously been under construction for quite some time. It's probably one of the reasons why Palpatine, although I'm sure he was upset, there were more, They did the successful test. They showed everybody, hey, we got this power. So they're building another one. And, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, even on Earth here, right? We build a successful weapon of some sort. We're not just going to build one. We're going to build a lot of them. So why wouldn't the Empire do it if they have the resources?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is because you got to understand what the purpose of the Death Star was, and that was to dominate and control people, like control planets. Like how else? Like if you know that, because at any given point, like okay, if the Empire wanted to, let's say, control, Kashyyyk or whatever, it's like okay, they got to go down there and they got to like tear down the Wookiees, and that's a lot of resources that they have to use, human and technology, right? If the Wookiees don't want to give them what they want, fine. We'll just send our nice little Death Star over there.
Yep.
We'll orbit around their planet. Once they get wind of what this thing can do, you're going to bow the knee really quickly because with a simple push of a button, your whole existence is obliterated.
Right.
So and that's what they were talking about in A New Hope. He was like, fear will keep the systems aligned. Fear of this battle station. It's
Exactly.
because that was the whole point of it. It was just that this thing was such a massive weapon of great magnitude that like nothing could stop it. And the reason why Palpatine, of course, he wanted more of them because, of course, now it's not just one trying to control all of it, everything. But if you have multiple on different points of the galaxy, number one, it saves, time travel, right? I don't have to have one Death Star going to multiple places. I have them all kind of stationed around different parts of the galaxy. But the other part of it is uh they rebuilt it without the flaw that was in the original one. Because you remember in the first one, they said we analyzed it's like they do have a weakness, and he's like, should we, abort? Should we get you to your shuttle? And Tarkin is like, in our moment of triumph, I think you underestimate their chances, or overestimate their chances. Essentially, they're saying like, okay, we figured out what they're trying to do, and there's a possibility it could work. So, do you want us to get you out of here? And Tarkin was just so arrogant. It's like they'll never hit that, or
Well, and I
they won't
mean,
survive.
he had good reason to anyway, because if you think
Right,
about it, it was only because Luke was force sensitive.
right, and
Any
because if you
other
really look at,
pilot probably wouldn't be able to do it. Yeah.
well, yeah, if you're looking at the scale of things, it's like, okay, you have a whole, you know, the Imperial Navy is, you know, who are trained pilots, and you got a bunch of rebels who maybe, some of them may be decent pilots like Wedge and stuff like that, but at mass, I mean, you send a bunch of TIE fighters that way. I mean, you get knocked out. And then, of
Hmm.
course, we know where your base is. So now we can wipe you off the planet. I mean, Tarkin had every reason to believe that he was going to win, but like they didn't
Yep,
account for the fact that
that's true.
Luke was, had the force or whatever. So,
Which, of course, why would they, right? So Ronaldo
exactly.
goes on to say, if it was something Starkiller base-ish, it would make more sense, stronger and bigger. Well, it was stronger and bigger. I mean, actually, and I actually have a slide to cover this, but later on we're going to talk about the big space battle. I mean, this is the first time that we actually see the Death Star's like using its laser and starting to pick off ships and everything else. I mean, it actually had more firepower. It had, granted, the only weakness that it had, and that's only because it was half built, was the fact that
Hmm.
it was that shield generator. That was the thing that was protecting it from any kind of a harm. Because, another criticism that people levy is like, okay, you had this first one, which is like 2 meters wide. Well, now you got this gaping hole that ships can fly in and destroy the reactor.
The
But it's
core.
like, well, the thing is, though, that it was protected by a shield generator. So it wasn't like it was completely unprotected. It was like you had to be able to get in there, knock out the shield generator, and then be able to attack this thing. And even then, it was still not the easiest thing in the world.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I think that, people have to, people have to take that into consideration. Okay, so the next thing, of course, that we see in this thing is now we're looking at Jabba's palace. It's funny because up until now, and again, you have to put yourselves, forget all this content that being in 2023 here. You have to think of it, and I have to do the same thing because even though I have this experience, still, I was like 12 years old when this thing came out. So
Hmm.
I have to go back a little bit here. And you have to think in terms of, okay, you've heard everything about, I got this price on my head that Han Solo was talking about, Jabba this, Jabba that. Now you see this and it's like, okay, we're going to start to deal with Jabba's palace now. I mean, I think that that's kind of a big thing that I thought was a really cool addition to this movie. And I was really surprised, honestly, by how much time they spent with all of this. We'll go into specifics as, we go on with this thing, but
Hmm.
I mean, when you first saw this, because this is the first, because we had no idea. We didn't even really know what Jabba looked like. Because if you remember, the only thing that we had as a reference was that deleted scene that had that guy, basically standing in for what would have been Jabba, and he just kind of had a, kind of a little Gamorrean guardish type outfit on, and he was just talking to Han. I mean, for all we know, Jabba was a human guy.
Yeah, I mean, getting to Jabba's palace, you had no idea that it was this giant slug looking thing, or
Right.
giant snail or whatever he is. It's like, okay, this is nasty. Um, but yeah, I mean, Jabba's palace, and you kind of wondering like, well, why was Han so afraid of him? But you just didn't understand at the time that Jabba really controlled not only just Tatooine, but he also controlled a lot of stuff in the Outer Rim, because the Hutts were gangsters, and they were pretty much like the modern day mob, if you will. They were like a mafia family, and they behaved as such. And Jabba, being actually one of the more powerful ones in that, in that crime family. And so his name was feared, amongst, across the galaxy. And he hired, different scum and, like bounty hunters, smugglers who Han worked for. So, I mean, we're finally getting a chance to see, and we get a lot of revelations of people names we've heard. And I thought that was cool that George Lucas did as well. Is that like, okay, like you said, Eric, at the top of the show, there's a lot of payoff in this because,
Yeah.
we've heard the Emperor's name mentioned, you know, and then we also heard Jabba's name, you know, since A New Hope, basically. So now we finally get to see, okay, well, who was this Jabba that, Han is so worried about? Now we get him.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot that happens in this, and I have some pictures that basically represent that, but not everything. I mean, I didn't
Right.
really go into too much when Leia goes in and rescues Han, which was a big moment. There's a lot to unpack in this thing. I mean, basically, the next thing, of course, that we see is you have this mysterious figure, and this is a really important thing because obviously this is Luke, but this is Lucas. We've never really seen him before. He's
Mm-hmm.
kind of got this little dark vibe thing happening. Kind of almost like how the Emperor is dressed. We see later on, which I thought was really interesting. And like you said, he's choking Gamorrean guards. Now there's I haven't watched. I'd be curious to watch it, but somebody put out some sort of video where he's not actually force choking them. He's doing something else. But I don't know, man. I mean, look, again, I think what a lot of YouTubers, especially if they're younger, they make the mistake of not looking through this through 1983 glasses. You have to understand that when Lucas referenced a lot of this stuff, the only thing that we had was up to Empire Strikes Back. You just basically had two movies. Now, in the previous film, we saw basically Vader choking out everybody. Now, in this film, it opens up, we see Luke doing something very similar to the point where the Gamorrean guy was even kind of grabbing at his throat and, it
Gurgling,
Yeah,
like he couldn't breathe.
I don't really know what else you would call that, but I mean, again, I'm willing to entertain anything, and I don't know if it's been a thing to where anybody's even like official I'm talking about has even brought it up, but it's kind of what it looked like to me.
Well, and I think the difference is Luke might have force choked him, but
Maybe not
I don't
killed
think
him,
he killed him. I don't think he killed him. I think it was just more
knocked
so
him
just to
out.
incapacitate him. Yeah.
Yeah, that could be. And again, I mean, I think that this is cool because the whole time it was basically like you brought up at the beginning of this. This is the first time in any kind of medium that we see a very powerful, very confident Luke. This is a Luke that has obviously, he's a little bit further along than what we saw in The Empire Strikes Back. He's no longer the wide-eyed,
Bushy-tailed,
kid that's just, I mean, just in us
craving
having a sense
adventure.
of wonderment. Yeah. He's very controlled. He seems more disciplined. He just has a more powerful air about him. I mean, honestly, I thought during the scene that he was just going to walk in and just start killing everybody. I mean, because one of the biggest things that I had always wondered, and of course this is answered later on, both in EU sources and then also Expanded Universe, for those who don't know, and then also even through the new canon and through a lot of the comics that have come out through that, and that is, people have wondered, why didn't Vader just go in and just cut down Jabba and everything else? And that's because, he used Jabba. I mean, Jabba had a lot of connections, and he could get a lot of things done for the Empire that, quite frankly, it was just easier. It was just easier to pay Jabba to just do all this stuff, and then the Empire didn't have to worry about it. And, there's a lot of times where, because Jabba wasn't, amazingly, he was not afraid of Vader. there's a couple of times in the comics where Vader confronted him, and Vader actually reasoned with him. And that actually says a lot about Vader, too. It's kind of like, okay, he's not always out trying to prove anything. Sometimes he'll tolerate some people if they're giving him results and giving him what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is the flip side of that is in the scene with Luke. As we see later on, we think, oh, yeah, man, he's just going to start igniting his lightsaber and go to town on everybody, which he probably could have. I did find it interesting that when he was about to attack Jabba, that he used his blaster. And
Yeah.
that's still showing that Luke hasn't quite yet transitioned from that, I guess, blaster era to more lightsaber type of thing. He hasn't fully given himself to the Force yet.
Well, I would kind of disagree with that. I think he always has. This is a Luke with a plan now. Before he was kind of dependent upon Han to kind of come up with plans for certain things. Because Han was older, more savvy. Obviously, Han has gotten himself in and out of more things than Luke has in his life. So I think Han was kind of seen as the leader. But this is the first time, and we eventually see this because Han makes actual reference of this, is that Luke is now the leader in this whole rescue, right? So R2, 3PO, and what we didn't mention was that R2 and 3PO already had gone ahead of Luke. They already kind of made the formal introductions to let Jabba know that Luke was coming. And, in his message to Jabba, he was trying to, like you said, like Vader did, try to reason with Jabba, like, tried to come off as very diplomatic. He tried to present a peaceful approach to the release of Han and Leia. And Jabba scoffed at it. And so when Luke arrives and he shows up, he's like, yeah, I'm Luke Skywalker, Jedi Knight. And he comes in without a lightsaber, so we think. But really it's hidden in R2's little head compartment, and I think Luke kind of like, okay, I'm powerful enough in the Force where I think I can handle whatever these guys have, even without the use of my lightsaber. And he even kind of figured like he would allow himself to even be captured in a way because he knew it's like, okay, I have a plan. So I don't think so much he wasn't, accepting or embracing the full Jedi thing. I think that's what he was doing the whole time because Jedi tried to lead with peace more than violence. So he tried to come with a peaceful approach, much like Obi-Wan would have, you know, like, hey, greetings, mighty
Yeah.
Jabba, blah, 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 and gave that whole monologue.
Well, I'm not talking
And
about that
then,
part, though. I mean, yeah, I get that. I mean, obviously, because, like you said, a Jedi is going to go for peace. They're going to go for, hey, let's try to resolve this situation a little bit more diplomatically. Let's just go into this because obviously, and that's the difference between the Jedi and the Sith. The Jedi don't want to use their powers. They don't want to use their lightsabers. They don't want to use all this stuff. But I think that what I found interesting, although I had forgotten that you're right. I mean, his lightsaber was in R2's head. So, and I don't know if he was quite adept enough at the Force yet to deal with Jabba that way. Because the other thing that I always point to as well is that he didn't deal with the Rancor with the Force too. I mean, he's all, okay, I'm just going to like grab this bone and wedge it in his mouth and all this stuff. And then, of course, he breaks free. And then, he's able to shut the door on the thing and that kills him. But it's sort of like, and this is one of the first examples where I think it's the first time where you actually say to yourself, like, ooh, they're starting to use the Jedi powers somewhat conveniently when they want to actually use them. And hey, look at what these guys can do. Like, oh, I'm going to choke some Gamorrean guards, or I'm going to do something that advances a certain storytelling point that I want. The problem that I have, and fantasy tends to suffer from this quite a bit in general, and that is, well, he's going to use the Force in this. I mean, if his life is in danger, he's going to use the Force to do it, you know? I mean, it just, I don't know. That's the part that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, honestly. But
Well, it's for me too, and trust me, I'm right there with you until I kind of started to figure out what I believe, and I can't say it's actually true, but what I chose to believe was the case. I think what Luke was doing was the whole rope a dope thing. I think he was just pretty much trying to lure Jabba into this whole false sense of security of thinking that Jabba had the upper hand on him.
well, that could be. I mean, that's not an apologist thing. That could be because, you know, if he
Because
had
that's a
used his
tactic,
powers, yeah. But then again, though, it's kind of like he could have. If you really stop and think about that plan, there's so many ways that could have gone wrong. So many ways. In fact, it almost did in a lot of cases. Lando almost lost his life in the Sarlacc. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, much like a lot of things in Star Wars, right? It wasn't really thought through very well.
Well, I think, him waiting to like, okay, finally, I'm going to um because everybody kind of had cues. It's kind of like he already kind of had it mapped and scoped out. It's like, all right, he allowed himself to get, captured. They tried to send him to the ranker. He probably already knew about this stupid thing down there. And Luke, he could have used the force and done a bunch of stuff to, make it simpler for himself. But it's like he had to make it seem like, he was struggling. And that because Jabba was just kind of like, oh yeah, you're not some great powerful Jedi or whatever. He's like, he think he Jedi. He kept saying that the whole time. And it's like I think he was trying to, and he even made mention about something about being overconfident on his arrogance or something like that. So I think that's what Luke was really trying to reinforce because he knew that was set up his perfect plan. And it's like, okay, once he kind of had everybody in, because he even said it, when he saw him, he's like, don't worry, I got everything under control. And Han is like, great. He's like, because it doesn't feel like it, and that's the idea. I think
Well, but I mean,
the
to
whole
me,
point was
it's an overall thing, though. I mean, there's so much left to chance. I mean, there's so much that actually started to go wrong. I mean, the one thing that I can say
but
from
that's
the
most
strategic
heroes
level,
though.
well, yeah, and I mean, again, this is fantasy. This isn't, but still,
Yeah,
I think that part of it too was the fact that because he didn't have his lightsaber, but again, he could have. I mean, the whole thing of,
sure.
he had to know that Jabba was going to put him on the sail barge. He had to know that. I mean, there's just like things he could not have. You can't plan for this. Like, there's so many things that if Jabba had just made a different decision, that it would have gone terribly wrong. What should have
Well, I
happened
think
in reality, if you think about this from a real standpoint, if Jabba was actually, or I'm sorry, if Luke was actually going, okay, this is a plan, because again, the stakes are high. My friend's life is in danger. I want to rescue him. How do we rescue him? Because we still have the problem of the Empire being out there, and he's using rebel resources, including Leia, by the way, to actually mount this whole rescue plan. I mean, another thing that Luke didn't even know about was the fact that Leia was going to end up being in the position to choke him. He didn't know she was going to be a sex slave or whatever it was. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that I think what he should have done. I'll tell you what he should have done. And this is what anybody would have done in his position, is that he would have had the lightsaber on him. He could have faked the whole rancor thing. Look like, okay, I'm going to give this guy a chance to be somewhat diplomatic or whatever, right? And then, okay, that goes horribly wrong. Okay, he has his lightsaber on him, destroy the rancor, go up, and then wreck shop. And basically rescue Han. And you don't have to worry about a Sarlacc pit, which he could not have known that they were going to take him to. I mean, how is he even going to enact this plan? he had to know that R2 would, and they would all end up on this sail barge, and that he would be in the perfect position to then launch the lightsaber because he knew that Jabba was going to make him walk this plank above this creature. I mean, it's a stretch. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't think it was detailed planned to that degree. I think it was kind of a over like almost broad strokes, as Lucas likes to do in his movies anyway. So I'm in the fault that I see in your plan had Luke gone it is like, okay, well, the moment he would have went down and okay, let's say he used a lightsaber to cut down the rancor, Jabba could have had any one of his minions kill Leia and Han right then and there. Then the whole rescue would have been for naught. I think that's why Luke had to kind of like play
Well,
the
you didn't
way
have
of
to have
the
him there. I mean, again, it's kind of like there were so many variables that they could not have possibly. Look, I understand the outer, like the outside
Mhm.
universe. I'm not talking about that. I know Lucas likes to do that. It's a fun
Right.
adventure film. That's what it ends up
Sure.
being. We're gonna move on
Right.
soon, I promise. But I'm just saying, in Lucas, this is the one thing that he's guilty of, and I know it's fantasy, but at the same time, and again, he wouldn't even have to use his lightsaber. He could have used the Force. He could have done a lot of stuff. It's just there's so much at stake. You can even say the same thing, and you and I have talked about this ad nauseum about how when you really stop and think that the whole universe is at stake, the way that Obi-Wan and Yoda handled Luke in the training and no
Mhm.
contingency plans. And I mean, it was just, it's like, really, dude, if the whole galaxy is at stake, you're really going, this is how you're going to handle it. This is why you lost in the first place. So
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying. All
I
right,
get it.
let me get to some of these chats. I'm gonna need some blood pressure medication here.
Got riled up, man.
Ronaldo says this is the first time that we see a Jedi Force choking. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Actually, that was one of the
Yes.
things that I remember seeing in the theater. Actually, I remember going, "Ooh, Jedi do this too." I always thought this was kind of a Sith thing, which they do sort of go back and say yes, but I don't know. He says, I think he wasn't 100% in touch with the Force yet. He needed his lightsaber a lot. So here's the thing. Usually, the way this works, you and I have talked about this too. Actually, when I think we might have covered this on one of our, this is how the Force works, balance of the Force. Dave Filoni explains the Force, whatever. We've done a couple of
Mhm.
shows on, hey, let's spend like 3 hours and do nothing but talk about the Force. We had a show like that once, and
Yep.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, we had to have covered this. That the Jedi seem to have a couple of different stages, right? When they start out, they're freshly Padawans, they have this skill. They're really more about their acrobatic hand-to-hand fighting ability and their lightsaber. That's kind of like their main thing, right? And then
Mhm.
they kind of get into more like the middle age thing where they're sort of using the Force and strategy, but then they're also still relying a little bit on their physical prowess and the lightsaber. And then you get to, when they're older. I mean, that's why I love the whole attack, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, when we do the Attack of the Clones in a couple of weeks. But I loved it when Dooku and was just like, you know what? We're not gonna settle this with the lightsabers. Let's just use the Force. Because, it's not gonna. We're kind of evenly matched here. We're Jedi masters basically. So this is kind of
Yeah.
stupid. It's an exercise in futility, basically. Okay, so here's one that we can get into a little bit, which we kind of did. Ronaldo says, by the way, can you guys explain to me what was the plan to rescue Han? I promise not to explode. In fact, I'll even let you go first.
Okay. So the okay, well, wait before I begin. Um Eric is well, I guess you can't maybe you might not be able to answer this. Are
I
you
can answer
asking what
quite a
was
bit.
Luke's Are you asking like
Well,
what was the overall plan, or was it like because it's really like it was really kind
I
of a
know.
three-tier plan.
Yeah, well, so yeah,
Because
I guess
I'll say this: it was a three-tier plan. The three tiers were diplomacy, a little bit active force, and then the big gun. That was the plan. You send R2 and 3PO in there to be diplomatic. All right, R2 speaks the language of Huttese, and he's a diplomatic. I mean, that's kind of part of his programming, right?
mhm.
R2 has the message. He's the PowerPoint presentation, if you will. So, all right, you got 3PO coming up there. He's like, greetings, giving all greetings and salutations and all that type of stuff. And then R2 plays the message. Luke kind of tries to give a diplomatic approach to the situation. After a certain period of time, he realizes, okay, Han didn't walk out with that. So, okay, phase two. Phase two of the plan was to send Leia in undercover as this bounty hunter with this whole thermal detonator. Probably didn't even really work, but it was just more so as a scare tactic to kind of get Jabba to bend. Like, okay, to which Jabba's like, this bounty hunter's my kind of scum. He's like, I like. And Jabba could kind of sense there was something up. He's no fool. He's been doing this a while. Of course, so when that didn't work, Leia was trying to sneak in and, defrost Han, which she did. But then, they ended both getting thrown in prison. Well, Han got thrown in prison. Leia became a sex slave somewhat. Kudos to Jabba on that one, on the outfit. Um,
Hey,
I
just
mean,
a
he
little
just had that
something you
laying
happen to have
around.
laying
See that?
around,
See, that's what I'm
right?
saying. That's my thing. He had that laying around, and it's like it was perfectly her
And
size.
it
I'm
fit
just
her.
saying now.
So you must have had a
Yeah,
lot of them. You must have. We'll get to
yeah.
that though. We will get to that.
But so okay, so then that didn't work. When Leia didn't return back with Han after a certain period of time, Luke was like, "Okay, that's not working. I got to come in, and then this will be the final stage of it all." And then he goes in, but everybody kind of had their role. Even Lando being a plant on the inside, he was already there undercover as a guard or a henchman or something like that.
Hmm.
So Lando was kind of in there, kind of surveying it anyway.
Yeah, he was probably
And
a
and
combination of
maybe
like
that's probably
reconnaissance and then
why,
also maybe a
and
little
that might be
bit
how Luke knew what was
reinforcement.
going to happen. Yeah, maybe that's
Maybe.
kind of how Luke knew was because Lando kind of probably could have used the communicators like, oh yeah, they're planning to do this. If you
Yeah,
show up,
weak. Let's
they're
move
gonna.
on. Let's just.
I know,
We're
but
getting into Star Wars apologist territory here, but no, I mean
I
it's
got
true.
you.
I mean he was definitely sent in for reconnaissance to
Hmm.
pretty much scope out the place, to get the lay of the land, figure out, how things undeniable because he was there
Right,
first. I mean, it was
right,
definitely implied. I mean, look, when he very creepily started wearing Han's clothes at the end of Empire Strikes Back and he and Chewie went off, first of all, they had to locate him. And this
hmm,
is why, by the way, this is a good time to actually plug that comic series, The War of the Bounty Hunters, Crimson Reign, all this stuff. They deal very heavily with all of this because you find out that Kira actually got a hold on, stole him from Jabba. Um, Vader ended up having to fight her. The whole Crimson Dawn. I mean, it's gotten really, really good. So there was actually a lot that happened between when we saw Lando and Chewie fly off versus when we pick things up with Return of the Jedi. But of course, we have to pretend like we don't know any of that stuff, right? So
hmm.
yes, that is without a doubt, I think, the case. So yeah, that's a pretty good thing. Now, of course, David has joined us. Actually, he joined us a while ago. But, we were talking. He says, hello, gentlemen. Sorry I'm late. It's so funny y'all are talking about Jabba. Laughed my butt off the first time I saw him. Side note, that's what Clarence looks like. Must be a little inside thing for you.
Inside joke, yes.
So basically, he goes on to say, you referenced that there were methods used in episode 4 that changed the movie industry. Are there any methods of directing, writing, casting tips, etc., that need to be observed in this movie? I mean, other than the fact that they basically pushed the envelope a little bit, I I know the Jabba puppet was actually pretty crazy. I forgot how many puppeteers were controlling that, but it was some insane amount. So obviously, the Yoda puppet in Empire Strikes Back, that was kind of like the big industry, holy crap, I can't believe that this is happening kind of thing. You know, and then of course, you get into Return of the Jedi, it's more of the same stuff. And there were some advancements, really hard to say. I think some of the sound things were by that time. I mean, I know that, and my timeline's a little fuzzy. It's probably a little closer to the Phantom Menace, but I remember that so no, it could have been around this time. The Avid system the nonlinear editing system was actually developed because of Lucas. He's the one that more or less invented it. So Lucas kind of invented nonlinear editing. I mean, it's it's just crazy when you stop and think what this guy has done that we're still using today. So,
well, I would say some of the writing, to David's more direct question, the writing and directing aspects of it. Yeah, I think once again you have to look at, Return of the Jedi as a story of redemption, ultimately. And it took different mechanisms to get us to that point. One, Eric so eloquently started off this night with that whole bridge scene. That was one of some of the best writing, just because in the directing of it, because you have a guy who's in a suit, in a costume, with no facial expression. See, at least, and he has to make mannerisms to convey that vulnerability that, Eric was speaking of earlier. So there's that, and I'm sure we're going to get back to that scene, but there's the conversation that takes place between Vader, the Emperor, and Luke, the dialogue, and then even the strategy of writing the plan of how, when the Emperor kind of starts explaining to Luke his plan, like, it was I who allowed the Rebel Alliance to know the location of the shield generator. Like, just the whole layout of everything, using the Ewoks as, using that as a narrative of a primitive life form beating technology. It's like a subtext in
yeah, but I don't know if those
Return of
are.
the Jedi.
I mean, I think his question kind of relies more on, like, when we talked about A New Hope, we talked about all these revolutionary techniques that changed the entire movie industry. The motion camera, putting the camera thing on there wasn't really any of that I recall anyway.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about in that capacity, I would probably say, yeah, all the puppeteering was on the grander scale. And even just creating like a lot of the sounds, a lot of the different those techniques,
Yeah,
just
some
the
of the
Foley editing,
locations, all that stuff. I mean,
location stuff.
but again, I think that that's more like just taking what was done, and I don't remember anything specifically being invented for this film.
Oh,
It's
well, no,
really
I
more
wouldn't say that.
like, okay, we're just going to take
Take
all
what you already
these
built
revolutionary
and just
things and, yeah, just expand on it. That's really more, I think, the nature of his question is like, hey, did he invent anything else? Now, the Phantom Menace, when we talk about that next week,
yeah, now
completely different story. That's the
yeah,
next phase of, oh,
that's the
look,
next jump.
yeah, Lucas just
But
completely reinvented filmmaking again.
yeah, and that's what you do, honestly. Like, you take if you're to revolutionize something, you just grow that until you feel like you can't push that any further,
Mm-hmm.
until either your ideas or technology advances in such a manner where you can take your next thoughts to the next level.
Which is why he probably waited
And
so
like I said,
long.
yeah, that's why Phantom Menace was finally like done, because
Right.
he's like, okay, technology has evolved to the
It's
point
caught up to my
where
mind.
exactly.
So David
Exactly.
says, that's impressive that Jabba is a puppet. By the way, it was two B's in Jabba. I know it's like a nitpicky thing, but I gotta say it.
And a puppet's PPET, but
I know. I know, it's like if we started grammatically correcting people, it'd be... Says I didn't know that. I'm glad you said that because I was looking at Yoda asking myself, what is he? Now I know he's a puppet. Impressive. Yeah, well, that's the thing is that, there was... I mean, if there was anything that you can point to say, hey, what was revolutionary? I mean, there were some things about how the old biker scout, like the speeder bikes going through the forest. I remember there was some stuff there. But again, it was really more like just advancing things that were already there. We should probably point out, because it was alluded to in David's comments, that again, so the last film was the first one. The first movie, A New Hope, was directed and written by George Lucas. Empire Strikes Back was written and executive produced by Lucas, but it was directed by Irvin Kershner. And this one was written by Lucas, executive produced and all that, but it was directed by Richard Marquand. Now, the reason why, again, so Kershner didn't want to involve... he was actually asked to return, but he didn't want to return. But they had to find somebody outside of the Directors Guild because, once again, and this is something that people forget about. Yeah. These movies are essentially independent films. And Lucas didn't really want to try to start using all these union people. So he didn't want to pay the fees. So he had to find people that were outside of the guilds. And that's why that happened. All right. So now we move on to a scene, of course, that you alluded to earlier. And we get a little bit of a different Leia in this one.
She looks so shame in this picture. Like,
I know.
Like, I hope my mom doesn't find me like this.
I know. She's kind of looking like, man, I cannot believe I signed on to this. I can't believe I let George talk me into this. Right. Because, again, the original version of that bikini was actually metal and it hurt, So there's all kinds of like behind the scenes stories about this whole metal bikini thing that, she's wearing. But needless to say, we were kind of like, all right.
A lot of boys in the 80s were like, good looking out, George. Right.
There's some plausible moments in this film. But, the other reason why I say that, too, obviously this is a little bit of a play on words here, but I also say that because, look, she came in dressed as a bounty hunter and, threatening him with a thermal detonator, and she basically defrosts Han. She's caught in the process, and then she's enslaved. But again... she does overcome, right? when they're on the sail barge and all that stuff, she's the one that's like, not your typical slave. She wraps the chain around his neck and is pulling, and, you see Jabba's tongue like all flapping and stuff as he's dying. So this one, I think more than the other ones, even though we've always known that Leia was a little bit of a more of a spunky, kind of like take no orders from anybody. And
she's
more
like a typical damsel.
Right. She's more of a leader, But, in this one, she's really, I think, taking things a lot front and center. And she does this through the entire film, actually. And she ends up saving Han later. And, the whole, like, they do that reversal where she says, or he says, I love you. And she says, I know, which I thought was okay. That was kind of cool.
Right.
But yeah, and for some reason I just want to leave it on this slide, but, But, that's one of the things that I thought was really cool about this, too, is that, again, it expands Leia's character quite a bit. And then so, of course, as we've alluded to, Luke has a plan. Little shaky, in my opinion, but it is a plan nonetheless. And this is where we get to the whole sail barge scene, which I really thought was kind of cool. I thought that, seeing R2 basically as kind of like a waiter, with that little tray on his head, and, 3PO's like, I know you're serving drinks, but I thought that was kind of funny. There was some really cool things. I didn't put a picture of Boba Fett in here, but of course it has to be noted that in this scene, this is the first time we actually see Boba Fett in live, well, not really in live action. That was really Empire Strikes Back. But this is the first time that he He has a little bit of an
He's seen in
expanded role.
combat.
Yeah, he's in combat, a little goofy, little slapsticky. The way Boba Fett meets his end is not exactly the best. I thought that actually that was probably one of the worst decisions. You know, you create this really cool character, you create this mystique, and he goes out like he's in a Chevy Chase film. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was kind of, um, it was slapsticky in nature, but I mean, it worked for me though. Like, I think it was a situation where, um, it was it was an accident type thing. Like, Han turns around with the staff and accidentally ignites his jetpack that sends him into the barge. I mean, it's like, okay. And then he can't catch himself. He ends up rolling into the Sarlacc pit. I mean, yes, it's slapsticky in nature, but I mean, I think
Yeah, you know what's
even
funny?
at least his so alleged death was manly. I mean, he got eaten by a giant, Sarlacc, versus,
I'll give you
so
that.
I could see if he
I'll
at least
give
it
you
wasn't
the
like you know, some stupid
But it was just like
like 3PO hit him over the head with a candlestick or something and he goes out. I
he
mean, it
might
wasn't
as
like a
well
Looney
have,
Tune
though.
type
I
thing.
mean, look, I'm telling you, and here's the thing that's really funny too. They're kind of like, "Oh, this thing was made for kids." Yeah, I was 12 years old when this came out, and I hated it as a 12-year-old. So
That's because
basically,
that's because you love Boba Fett though.
everybody
So,
loved Boba Fett back then. Like, he was the guy. He was everybody. I mean, we all sent away for the action figure. It was like this, it was a thing. We were so excited. And we thought we were actually going to be treated with a Boba Fett versus Han Solo battle finally. Which, I mean, we kind of were, but, it's not what
not the
we were
way
expecting. Thank you,
expecting.
George.
Right.
But,
Right.
I mean, hey, it is what it is. The plan, of course, we went through that. It was a little shaky, but I mean, again, and it was fun. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm saying a lot of this stuff. And by the way, this isn't something that I'm, okay, I'm 52 now and I'm attacking this. These are a lot of these feelings I had at the time when I first saw it. Of course, you do go through this whole thing of, oh man, I can't believe I'm seeing a new Star Wars film. I mean, there is that. So you really, at that moment, you're pretty much okay with everything you're seeing because you're in that world again.
Right.
But still. And then of course, this is one of the pictures that you see all the time. Ignite
Right.
the green. We
Yes,
see
sir.
now that, and this kind of plays into Ronaldo's comment earlier, right? Where he rebuilds his lightsaber. Because, I mean, we knew he lost it. We knew he lost his other one on Bespin. And so we knew he had to get another one somehow. And it stood to reason that he was going to build it. This is the first time, should be noted, that we see green as a lightsaber color. So this was, you had to understand, this is a big deal. I mean, sure, in the post-Attack of the Clones world where, we've seen every color of the rainbow at this point, back then, you had to put yourself in this 1983 thing. I mean, this was a big deal to see this.
Yeah, red and blue. That's all we knew.
You were thinking about that one for a while.
Actually, that was more of a freestyle.
All right. It's pretty good. All right, so
Thank you.
we get to see Luke pretty much for the first time start to wreck shop a little bit. And again, and one of the things that I thought was cool about this scene too, by the way, was when he got shot in his robotic hand, and then you saw it's like, oh, it's a robotic hand, and it didn't stop him, and you're like, yes. I mean, I thought that was cool.
I love the whole thing. I mean, honestly, I love the tension building in the scene leading up to it.
Sure.
Because it's like Luke is standing on the plank. He's telling Jabba, like, look, this is your last chance. Jabba's still being arrogant, like, whatever, kid, So he's like,
I love the whole line. Jabba hopes that you die honorably or something like that.
Right. And I love Han's response. He's like, You tell that, he starts going off on him.
He's like,
And
right?
but right.
Oh,
Yeah.
the other line that was really great was when Luke was kind of like, I used to live here, and he's like, you're gonna die here,
Yeah.
I mean, Han was just undeniably Han. I mean, I gotta say that the whole scene when he was reunited with Chewbacca, in the prison, um, they're just, it was, that whole thing was just like classic Han, Luke, and Leia, man. And I think that that's what we wanted from episode 7 and we were robbed. But,
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely. The tension, the whole like, it was probably like trombone and tuba or something that brown, brown, brown,
Hmm.
he does a little
Yeah, that
thing and then see the
yeah.
portal open
R2
and
opens
the
a little
lightsaber comes up.
because I
Yep.
didn't know I didn't know what that was at first when I was a
I
kid,
know.
and I'm
That's what I
like,
was like. It's like, what's he
what
gonna
the heck
do?
is that?
Was that a mortar? It's
Yeah, right. So then, like, he jumps off the plane and he turns around, flips, and this is the first time we're seeing anything like really. I don't want to say first time because he kind of did a little
well,
acrobatics in
but you know
Empire,
what?
but
This is where those came into a real world situation, though. So that's a good point
yeah,
because it's kind of like when he's on Dagobah, you're like, why are you? What's this all about? You
why are you
know?
doing gymnastics and all
Right?
this? And I thought it was like
Exactly.
he was doing cardio and swinging from ropes, and you just think,
Right.
it's like okay, but you see like how this comes in handy.
Mm-hmm.
But Luke flips up and he flips and he lands over, the guards, and then perfectly the lightsaber falls in his hand. And when it falls in his hand and he ignites it and it's green, I went nuts as a kid. I was like,
Oh
whoa,
yeah. Oh,
okay. Like
absolutely.
this, I thought it was I thought it was a more powerful lightsaber or something like that.
Exactly.
So,
It's kind of what I thought too. I'm like, oh, is
because
this
then
a
he started
next
wrecking
level
shop.
thing? Right.
Right. He starts wrecking shop and laying everybody out with the stupid thing. And I'm just like, okay, cool. And of course, yes, he gets eventually gets shot in his, mechanical hand, but he still keeps going. And, um, so then that's when like the whole plan is kind of like everybody's kill who you can pretty much at that
Yeah, it's
point.
kind of like you said, it's
So
the last phase, right? I mean, it's kind of like, all right,
yes,
everything else now it's go
everything but
time.
the kitchen sink. Yeah, we got to go.
And the whole thing, I thought, another thing that cannot be overstated here is when, Lando was about to fall in and, Han's like rescuing him and they have that kind of banter back and forth a little bit, it's
Hmm.
like, okay, they're cool now, I mean, it was really
Right.
nice to just see everybody's getting along. There's no more distrust. There's no more of pretty much any of these things overshadowing. This is just a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So David, and of course we're pretty much addressing this now, so it's a good time to bring it up. He says, at the time, was a green lightsaber a monumental thing? Oh, absolutely. Like seeing
Hmm.
Super Saiyan Blue at the movies for the first time. And yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Definitely was. Yeah,
Is
because like I said, red and blue is all we knew at the time. It's like okay, you either had a red lightsaber if you were a bad guy, and if you had a blue lightsaber, you're a good guy. That's kind of how we looked at things. And so it wasn't until I saw Return of the Jedi, and then you see Luke, with this green one, you're just like, well, what the heck is this? It's like I didn't know lightsabers could be other colors now, and then it makes you wonder, like, okay, well, can they be any color or what? But it just seemed that this more powerful Luke, because remember it's all within context. It's like, all right, we see Luke um show up and he's definitely more powerful. So we're just thinking like, okay, well, maybe he has a more powerful lightsaber. um it looked different than the one he had that he got from Obi-Wan, which was his father's. So it's just kind of like, all right. Now, at that point in time, I don't think I really paid attention to Obi-Wan's lightsaber. It wasn't until years later that I realized that Luke kind of modeled it after Obi-Wan's as a tribute, or it's like, a homage to his former master. But yeah, I mean, it was a huge thing for me, seeing that green it just looked so cool.
yeah, and
And
I
I
had
want
the
like,
exact same thought that you did. I'm like, well, I mean, is this like a more powerful one? Now, Ronaldo brings up a good point. He's like, it was supposed to be blue originally, right? And it was. It was supposed to be blue originally. The problem was, I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was something like they had a problem because they were using blue screen at the time. And because they were using blue screen for a lot of things, they decided to make it green. You know, it's kind of like, why does Mace Windu have a purple lightsaber? Because Sam Jackson wanted it. He wanted purple.
Well, that was...
So there you go. Of course, by this time, you know, we started to see orange and yellow and all this
technology was as such where, you know, a lot of things weren't as limiting either.
Yeah, exactly. So you are correct. It was supposed to be blue originally, but they changed it to green. But again, you know, we didn't know that when we were first seeing the film. So, you know, you start to, again, you're always going to look for the in-universe explanations first. All right, so then, of course, you know, they're reunited, and they go off. Now, this is where things start to separate at first. This is where we're going to jump around a little bit because, you know, you obviously have... It's kind of a weird twofold thing. You know, they all reunite and they basically talk about the second Death Star. You know, Luke starts to go on the mission or whatever. But before some of that happens, he has to take the whole, like, Dagobah detour, I like to call it. So, you know, just bouncing around a little bit, maybe not going so linear because there's a lot of different things that you can really talk about with a lot of this stuff, right? So, you know, the first thing, obviously, is you got, before Luke gets there, before he kind of rejoins, per se. I mean, he was around, but they bounced around a little bit. They did bounce a little bit. And so, the main thing is you have the mission to Endor. Now, the one thing that I thought was kind of cool, did you think... when you first saw Endor, that it was actually Yavin? Or did you know it was actually
Endor? A moon?
Yeah, because if you really stop and think of the terrain, I know some people that did. Now, I didn't because even as a kid, I was like a junkie, right? I was like, I gotta see and I gotta read, everything I can about Star Wars, right? So, I mean, I read a lot about a lot of this stuff before the film even came out. Now, again, it wasn't like it is today. I mean, it was a lot harder to come by, but, you know, they basically talked about it, right? The forest moon of Endor. But I just thought it was kind of cool to see the group on a different kind of mission. You know, because when you look at it, the last time that they were really all together, it was just on the Death Star, and they were just getting to know each other. And there was a lot more room, I think, for natural organic comedy, which Star Wars is known for, but then also, just a lot of fun little things that they can get into. You know, which of course we'll get deeper in because we're going to move through some of this stuff so that we can really talk about it. But
yeah, I mean, you know, the mission was cool. I mean, they had to, you know, they were kind of dispatched to go take out the shield generator so they could mount the offensive attack on the actual Death Star. That was the whole point of the mission, you know. And along the way, you know, they get separated again though, because they kind of all started off together.
Yep.
But then, you know, Han and Leia kind of had to go off and do their thing. Luke, you know,
well, it was because of the little speeder bike thing. I mean, that was the first thing. But I mean,
and they went looking for Leia and they couldn't find her, and they was hoping like, okay, well, because Han was jumping the gun, doing stuff, and you know that ended up into this whole speeder bike chase, and now everybody's trying to. Lucas has to battle one person on a speeder bike, and once again, he could have very easily used the Force in that situation too. But once again, it just doesn't make for good movies if you just keep using that as the catch-all for everything.
Well, I will say this though: I love the lightsaber usage in this film.
Yeah,
I don't think it was overdone, but more importantly, it wasn't underdone, because this is when we needed to see Luke, you know, begin to use, because again, like we said, you know, there's stages that a Jedi goes through, and once they have this super powerful weapon, they tend to rely on it. It's
Well, the thing is, what I loved about Return of the Jedi is that, going back to what you said, like once again at the top of the show, it's the payoff, right? So all the things that we've seen Luke learn to try to do as he's maturing in the Force or in becoming a Jedi himself, we see it come to fruition in Return of the Jedi. So we already saw, like, okay, like you said, the flip when he was flipping with Master Yoda on Empire, just getting in physical shape and being able to be acrobatic and do those type of things. Here's another instance where the whole, when Luke uses his lightsaber against the guy on a speeder bike, it was a callback to the whole droid, the little training probe that Obi-Wan had on the ship. Because you don't know where these blaster fires are coming from, but Luke was able to deflect all of them, in reasonably short order, and then still on top of that, chop off half of the speeder bike. So it just shows you once again how Luke's training has evolved, and now to the point where he can use it in combat and it's effortless.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I didn't even think about the whole uh practice droid or whatever from A New Hope, but you're right. I mean, that was definitely like, look, and Han even made the whole comment, going up against uh droids is one thing, going against the living is something else. Well, now he's going against the living, and now he understands. And like you said, he's trained to do it. And that's the thing that was really cool, is that there's really no wasted scenes here. You basically see Luke systematically beginning to learn the ways of the Force, learning some of the combative techniques of the Jedi, and really getting that stuff down, which, I thought was really cool. So David says, did the free for all diminish Luke's green lightsaber and the color that followed? Trying to understand the fandom.
In Dragon Ball Z,
Yeah. Transformations got worn out and it cheapened over time. No, I mean, because honestly, Luke's lightsaber pretty much remained green.
Mhm.
He didn't, so pretty much the way that it works is that lightsabers, because they're made from kyber crystals, and again, the Clone Wars cartoon, I should say animated series. They hate it when you say cartoon. Star Wars animated series basically established in canon that these things come from kyber crystals. And basically what a lightsaber is, and really this is even before the Clone Wars, this part was, where you put a lightsaber in, a little laser kind of beam or whatever shoots through the kyber crystal, and that's what makes the blade. And then there's all kinds of controls in there that will determine the standard length of the blade. But it's kind of a thing. And Ronaldo alluded to the deleted scene that actually showed Luke building his new green lightsaber. And it's interesting that this thing was deleted, because that was part of the reason, I think, why Vader later, is making a big deal. He's looking over the lightsaber going, oh, so you constructed a new lightsaber. Indeed you are powerful. Well, it's a callback to that scene, but it was ultimately taken out of the movie. And basically, most of the time, Jedi use blue, they use green. There was even, wasn't there like some sort of a thing to where, like, if you were a guardian, you were mostly like blue, and like one of the mystical ones, it was yellow and all that stuff. We went through that. Actually, we had a show on that, I think.
Well, yeah, the whole thing with the lightsaber, and just to kind of, surmise it in a little bit, is, of course, it's the Jedi's primary weapon of choice. Because it's more elegant, it's not as, as Obi-Wan would say, it's not as clumsy as a blaster. But the thing is that, it takes great skill to create one, because essentially what a lightsaber is like a very condensed small reactor, right? Basically, it's a very strong, powerful energy source that you're confining into a very tight window that makes a blade. And that's why the Death Star is made by a giant kyber crystal, which is why they were able to use it to blow up a planet, because of the energy that it can refract. If you send enough power through it, it becomes like a little mini reactor. So that's why it's very
That's a good point, because the Death Star
right,
basically is shooting its lasers through a kyber crystal, and that's what gives it
through
its
a
power. So
right. And so
it's good.
that's why but now as far as the color, part of the Jedi trials or part of the training that goes into becoming a full-fledged Jedi is building your own lightsaber, because it takes the force to kind of help you guide the pieces together, because if you don't do
Mm-hmm.
it right, it'll blow up on you and they'll
Exactly.
kill you. So that's why it takes such skill to really master it, and you become one with the force in that way. And in the process of doing that, while you're handling this kyber crystal, the kyber crystal is actually somewhat organic, meaning that it kind of has a life of its own and it kind of reacts to the force. And your who you are inside kind of coincides with this kyber crystal, because not only do you pick the kyber crystal, but the kyber crystal picks you.
Yeah, it kind
So
of
it's
bonds
it's
with
kind
you.
of a
Exactly.
it kind of bonds with you. And so in creating that bond, that's what gives the lightsaber its or the crystal its color. So if you're more of a peaceful person, if you're more like defense, if that's more your thing, it's going to be blue, which is why Obi-Wan's was blue, Anakin's was blue at one point. Um, if you're kind of more of a valiant, person, you're really kind of like that champion for good type thing, you kind of have more of that green. That's kind of the color that represents those attributes. So it kind of goes with the attributes. And then with a Sith, because their primary thing is evil, hate, you know, things that are all negative, it bleeds the kyber crystal, which it turns red. That's why it has a red color.
Which is why
So
all
that's kind
Sith
of
are red. Yeah. And
yeah, that's
again,
why
I
all
mean,
Sith
look,
are red.
you know, we did an entire show, like exhaustive, that was all about lightsaber colors and what they mean. And I mean, it was a pretty comprehensive show. So if you're really curious about, you know, how lightsabers are constructed, because look, the bottom line is nobody knew this in 1983. I have to
Of
say
course.
that
Right. That's
right out the
true.
gate.
This
I
didn't
mean,
this knowledge didn't come until way later.
right, way later. And I mean way later, like within the last 5 or 10 years later. Okay? So I mean, this isn't something that like you're watching Return of the Jedi and you see the deleted scene of Mark Hamill putting a few pieces together and it's like, yeah, this is way way later stuff. But
Right.
again, still, I mean, this is kind of the beginning of it though. So this is all the foundation of what we came to know later. But if you're really into it and the lightsaber color thing is your thing, we did, like I said, go back and look through our videos. We did do an entire show on it, which was actually pretty cool. And, this is a good time to start bringing this up too, because this is when we finally deal with the death of Yoda. Now, I have to say that when I first saw this, I was really shocked. I was like, wow, they're killing him off. I mean, they just
Hmm.
introduced him in the last film. You
Right.
know? I mean, it makes perfect sense because from a storytelling perspective, he's not really needed at this point. It's kind of like, look, you're either going to suit up and help me or you're going to die. And of course, in the original draft of Return of the Jedi, the ending wasn't the ending that we came to know from the theaters and then later special editions and all that. It was actually going to be that Obi-Wan and Yoda in Force Ghost form appeared in the Emperor's throne room when Luke was about to be defeated, and they go up against him and destroy him. So it's pretty intense. And actually, there's somewhere floating around, there is actually a video that somebody made because they got a hold of that draft. You can find it online, but somebody actually made a video and really went in depth about what it was. So if you hadn't seen that, can't remember what it was, but just search like alternate ending Return of the Jedi or whatever, and you'll find that. But still, this is a really poignant scene. This is a really important moment in Luke's life.
Yeah, I mean, I really love this scene. it was definitely one of those heartfelt, quiet moments that you really,
Hmm.
um, because you kind of grew to love Yoda, especially after Empire. And I want to see more of him until when you get to Return of the Jedi. We got a little bit of that, but then we're seeing him in his last waking moments, and he has some last final words of wisdom for Luke, and he's basically trying to tell him don't underestimate the powers of the Emperor. You know, he finally asked Yoda, "Is Darth Vader my father?" Like, okay, I have these feelings, but I need to know from you. Like, you were there, you were around. Is it true? And then Yoda said, "Your father, he is." And so then, Luke kind of had to come to grips with that reality. Like, okay,
Yeah, which is kind of funny because he's like, told you to be unfortunate this is, it's kind of like,
yeah. And then, like,
I mean, I thought that was cool that they dealt with that.
yeah. He's like, was it unfortunate that I know the truth? And he was like, no, it's unfortunate that like, this is the path you have to go. Like, this is the path you have to go. Like, you must confront Vader. You basically have
Right.
to
And
do
knowing
what
that
needs to
is
be
going to
done.
make it
And
harder.
knowing
Yeah.
that, it makes it harder for you to do
Right.
what you need to do because you now know who he is. And, then it's like, well, even he made the boastful moves like, no, then I am a Jedi. And he's like, no, you're not. Not until you confront your father. And that was the last step for him. And so it still showed Luke that he had some more work that needed to be done. And then he also finds out the revelation of he's not the only Skywalker. As Yoda's taking his last breath, he kind of lets that little tidbit slide out,
Yeah,
like,
right. Well, here's an interesting
that.
little fun fact. Leia was not, well, we already know, we've talked about this before, that Leia was not always the sister, right?
Right.
That was something that's why the Empire Strikes Back kiss between Luke and Leia turned very, very creepy very, very quickly. But
Mm-hmm.
originally, there was supposed to be a new character because when they started talking about at the end of Empire, that boy is our last hope. No, there is another. The another was not referring to his sister. The other was referring to some other Jedi that was going to come out of nowhere or something like that. But that storyline was abandoned. So in order to make it make sense, I think that's when the whole sister line was brought in. And of course, the
Yeah.
other thing that I thought was really cool was that Yoda, he was a lot less stern in this. He was a little bit cooler, kind of like, look, I so old through your eyes. And he's like, no. And he's like, yes, I do. I mean, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of like touching dialogue in there too.
Yeah. It's like
Where
losing a grandparent. I mean, that's exactly what it was, you
exactly,
know. And all the
exactly.
knowledge is like, I'm sure Luke had now that Luke is at this point, and I later on, for me personally, this moment had a lot of gravitas for me because, as a kid, of course, I always, thought it was sad because Yoda's always been one of my favorite characters.
Hmm.
But as I got older and started to watch this, it's crazy because Yoda, had so much knowledge. At 900 years old, he had amassed all this information about the world, the Force, Jedi, Sith, all this stuff, right? And just when Luke is at the point now where he's pretty much a man, he's a man who has all the skill sets to do what needs to be done. He just needs to execute it. But I'm sure, Luke, of course, still had questions about a bunch of stuff. And to lose the one person that could probably answer those for him or at least guide him in that way. For me, when I lost my grandfather, that's kind of how I felt. Like, like I lost him right when I became an adult. And so it's like, man, the person who raised me, I have so many questions on this side of being a man versus you teaching me to get to this point. I have so many questions now after this point, and you're not here to guide me. So I kind of felt like I kind of understood how Luke kind of felt in a way with like, man, unfortunately, forest ghosts aren't real. Otherwise, I'd be talking to my grandfather all the time. But, um, so I always love this moment in the movie because it's kind of like Yoda kind of giving him his final. um, instructions, final bits of wisdom to kind of help him to continue to be successful along his journey in becoming arguably one of the greatest Jedi to ever live.
Well, yeah, and I can understand that too, because actually, even though I had a dad, I mean, he wasn't really, my grandfather was really more of a father to me growing up than my own father was. Now, of course, since then, my dad and I have grown
Hmm.
a lot closer, but back then, yeah, that wasn't the case. So when I was
Hmm.
15 years old, I lost the guy that, you know, I could talk to and I looked up to and all that, and I began to rely more on my
Right.
mom. So, I mean, you know, now I hadn't lost him yet. So when I first saw Return of the Jedi, it was still 2 years, a little over 2 years before I would eventually lose him. But then, of course, when I started reflecting back on these scenes, it was very, very much the same thing. And it's true is that you were, from an in-universe perspective, you were kind of looking forward to, okay, now he's going to go back and he's going to get some more training, and this is going to be cool, and I'm going to really, you're going to soak all this in, and it's like, wait a minute, he just shows up for like 10 minutes and then Yoda dies on him. I mean, that's not fair. But the cool thing is, somebody else comes back. That is, of course,
Hmm.
Obi-Wan. And now, and we
Right.
brought this up in the last episode too, is that Obi-Wan, who pretty much has been in all three films, we see a little bit of a transition in power here as well, because when he first gets struck down by Vader, he's still there, but he's a disembodied voice. He's talking to Luke while he's in the X-Wing, but he can't quite appear to him yet. And then when he does appear to him at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back on Hoth, it's like a kind of a disembodied-ish, sort of
It's
like an
kind of
outline.
faint.
Yeah, kind of faint, not quite filled in. But here, it's basically like he's in person. He just has this little floaty aura around him. And then, of course,
Yeah.
that's where we get the whole certain point of view line, where it's like, well, wait a minute. You just told me that, Vader killed my father. And, that's not true. You didn't tell me he was my father. And Obi-Wan's like, well, what I told you was
Well,
true
that's
from a
and
certain point of view.
yeah, yeah. I love this scene honestly
Mm-hmm.
because it's one of those things where, and this is one of, like I said, this is one of the reasons why I love Star Wars so much is because there are a lot of life's lessons that are communicated, you know, throughout this movie, well, throughout these three movies, honestly. And I think that's where a lot of people, you know, we kind of raised on that, and
Sure.
the Yoda thing of do or do not, there is no try.
Yep.
It's kind of like I'm a harkens to Mr. Miyagi, saying either left side safe, right side safe, in the middle squish like grape. Like you have to pick, either you're gonna do it or you're not. You can't be in the middle. Um, but then here we get this whole moment where Luke is kind of asking and questioning Obi-Wan. It's like, okay, well, you always told me that Darth Vader betrayed and murdered my father, but then Yoda just told me he is my father.
That's
So why did you lie to me?
right.
And Yoda, I mean, Luke is really kind of asking Obi, why did you lie? And Obi-Wan is kind of like, I didn't lie to you. What I told you was a certain point of view. And he was like, well, what do you mean a certain point of view? And he basically says that, he's like, the good man that was your father was killed by Darth Vader. He's like, so that means the good man that was your father was destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
So what I told you, I didn't lie to you. I just told it to you in such a way that one, you could digest it, but two, it wouldn't impede your progress in becoming the person you are today in order to do what you needed to do. And that's one of those things, like a parenting thing. Those of you who may be, parents out there, sometimes you have to answer your kids questions a certain way because of what they can handle and what you need them to do in order to grow into the people you need to grow. So you have to give them certain things a certain way without
Right.
necessarily lying to them, but you have to give
Right.
it to where it's digestible for
So
the
they can
process that they
understand
need
and
to
they
go
don't get
on.
derailed by it.
Right.
And I mean, of course, I mean, Anakin did him a solid, as we found out in the Obi-Wan series, by basically
Right.
cleaning it up. It's like, well, Anakin Skywalker's dead or whatever it was he said. I thought that was
Yeah, he basically said him like, I killed him,
Yeah, 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 exactly. All right, so Ronaldo, um, he doesn't quite agree. He says, "I still think Obi-Wan's explanation is BS." Well, and I mean, Obi-Wan. The funny thing about Obi-Wan, if you kind of look at the history of him, he's kind of notorious for this. He's sort of bent things because if you think about it, even if you go back to A New Hope, he goes from either being somewhat mildly deceptive to maybe oblivious. Like my favorite is
hmm
like Luke is looking at the burning corpses of his aunt and uncle, and Obi-Wan's all like, all right, well, you got to learn the ways of the Force if you're coming with me to Alderaan. It's just like, hey, man,
hmm
how about a little sensitivity here,
Sympathy. Yeah.
a little sympathy. And then, of course, Ronaldo goes on to say, but the Obi-Wan show fixed this, I think. And yeah, so the further that
Definitely.
we get into this, now that we're in the final of the original trilogy, and especially once we go to the prequels, not so much the sequels, I think that they are starting to fix certain things retroactively with The Mandalorian and some of the content that happens after Return of the Jedi, but before Force Awakens. But you're definitely seeing a lot of this stuff in the content that happens between 3 and 4, where they're doing the best they can to fix some of these plot holes. So, thought that was cool. So now we get to the point too, to where we're meeting the Ewoks, and this is kind of like a depiction of the scene in the movie where 3PO is basically telling the Ewoks the story. I mean, I thought the whole Ewok thing, like the beginning of it, I thought was hilarious. Basically Leia befriends Wicket, and they're kind of cool. And then, of course, she gets to go off and have a really cool dress and all that stuff made, and they like her. But they ended up capturing Luke, Han, Chewie, R2, 3PO in their net, and then they're about to eat them. See, and this is the thing that's really funny about when you really stop and think about the Ewoks, because they're not as cute and cuddly as everybody thinks they are. They're about to cook these guys and make a dinner, and I really thought the whole idea that they thought that 3PO was a god was awesome.
Yeah, hilarious.
That was an actual stroke of genius. And then, of course, they're using a dialect that's so old, that 3PO's got to, even though he's fluent in 6 million forms of communication, it's like he's got to reach a little bit. Like, well, I think that this
I saw it on the right
yeah,
thing.
I think this is what they're saying. I'm not really sure, but I'm pretty sure I'm in the ballpark at least. And then, of course, Han going, why don't you use your divine influence and get us out of here? Perfect Han Solo stuff.
Han's sarcasm in this is hilarious.
It's off the charts. I mean, it's almost as good as he is in The Force Awakens. I mean, this is,
yeah.
I mean, I
Prime
loved
real
it.
estate for Han.
Prime.
Yeah, and the fact that, and the cool thing is, like, Luke, once again, being a little bit more wise and, understanding his surroundings and his situations, he uses it to his advantage. So he's like, all right, they think you are some type of guy. It's like, well, if they don't listen to you, you'll lose your magic because you made them angry. And 3PO was like, what magic? I don't have any. He's like, just tell them. And so, of course, 3PO obeys, and the Ewoks are kind of like, I don't know. But so then Luke starts using the Force with 3PO and lifting him up and floating him.
Another one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, another callback was, remember Luke with the X-Wing? He couldn't do certain things. He could lift rocks. But now you're lifting 3PO, you moving him or spinning him around and moving him and
very
gently
controlled.
settling him down.
Yep.
Very controlled. It just shows you how far Luke has come as far as his mastery of the Force. And
yes, and I think that's what it was designed to do. Definitely.
Absolutely. And like I said, they keep dropping little moments like that in this movie where it shows you his growth if you've seen the previous movies. And then, of course, after he sits 3PO down, and then now they realize, okay, he means business. Now they're all bowing to him and doing whatever he says. 3PO's line was great. He's like, "I never knew I had it in me," as if he did something. Just I thought that was
Right.
just hilarious.
That part was cool. And then when they didn't listen to him and they went ahead and started doing the thing anyway, and Han's trying to blow the flame out.
Oh man, no.
And
Yeah,
again, I mean, that was funny.
Han
And
trying to blow out a torch.
and of course, that whole little section too, that it was another one of those, oh, here we go, where R2 just had, with the net, he had just happened to have a little buzzsaw in his Swiss Army droid, kit or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I thought that once they started, and then of course Leia comes out and they're reunited again. And I thought that it was kind of cool, the dynamic that they had between them and the Ewoks. Now, again, it should be pointed out that originally it was supposed to be Wookiees, but they changed their mind because I think they're trying to make Kashyyyk or something like that. There was some issue, especially with makeup and all this other stuff that they had to do, and which of course we got plenty of that in Revenge of the Sith, where we finally get to see Kashyyyk. We finally get to see some of this stuff. So that part was cool. But yeah, I thought that this was, again, I thought there were certain elements of the Ewok thing that drove me nuts. And again, I'm not even talking about now. I'm talking about the 12-year-old me seeing this for the first time, as well as the second time, as well as the fifth, as well as the 10th. I mean, I saw this a lot in the theaters. I don't know. I might have seen it maybe 3 times, I think. Not really sure. But yeah, it was pretty cool. And then, of course, I had to put this title in there. This is, of course, the big reveal between Luke and Leia and this is another one of my favorite scenes. Because there's so much here.
Yeah.
You can unpack. There's just so much weight to this, because he's basically talking to Leia about the fact that he has to leave because Vader can sense him. And she's basically like, well, if Vader can sense you, then, then just,
Leave.
what'd she say? Yeah, leave or whatever.
Leave this place.
Right. Of course, he's kind of like, no, I got to face him. And then he eventually, because they sort of turn the whole, no, I am your father thing around in this movie, because that was revealed to Luke. Now, Luke is kind of like, Vader's my father, I can't kill him, and all this other stuff. And oh, by the way, you're my sister. And
so guess that makes Vader your daddy
exactly.
too.
And they never really said anything. Like, she didn't really react to that quite the way I expected. Now I know she did have that line, I've known, somehow I've always known. But I think she was talking more about the Luke part, not the Vader part.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because the Vader part came later. Because see, it was basically like, well, he's like, well, I have to face him. He's like, why do you have to face him? He's my father. And then she backed up, like, your father? Like she's like, whoa, okay, huh? That was that moment for her.
Yeah, man. Like, I don't know if we can talk still, it's.
And then she's like, well, there's more, Leia. He's like, it's so much I can't really tell. He's like, but the force is strong in my family. My father has it. I have it. My sister has it. And then he gives her that look that, and she's just like, and that's when she has the revelation, like, well, somehow I've always known, but then that's what he said, then why I have to face him. And then he's just kind of like, but I think it hasn't really sunk in until after he left, and she's having to process it all, like, and that's when Han kind of walks up, and first of all, Han probably saw this exchange kind of coming from a little bit of a distance. And
he did. I mean, his whole reaction was priceless too. Especially he's like, oh, but you can tell Luke. That's who you can tell. I mean,
yeah. He's kind of going off because they kind of built this thing, and that's the whole thing. That's understated. That's a kind of an understated thing, because ever since A New Hope, it seemed as though they were vying for the same woman.
Yeah.
they were friends, but they both kind of it's kind of like Peter Parker and Harry Osborn fighting over MJ at one point. That's
Mm-hmm.
kind of what it was like.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to a point where it's like, okay, Han felt like he made real progress. He had to kiss with Leia. They've been spending more time with each other. She came to rescue him. She kisses him after he comes out of the carbonite. They've built stuff here, so they've
Exactly.
kind of
Established relationship.
an established relationship. And so then now, but Luke has been gone this whole time, at least in Han's mind. So he's like, okay, well, either one, what's been going on since I've been frozen, probably in his
Right.
head.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what were y'all doing while I was hanging on Jabba's wall? you know, and then now it's like, okay, you know, now it's like, okay, when they both kind of run into Leia again, and Han's trying to pick up his business as usual because that's the way I left it. And now he's
Well,
seeing this.
especially as soon as he's defrosted, and she's like,
She
"Oh,
kisses
someone who
him.
loves you,"
Yeah.
It's kind of like,
Right.
I mean, you're
Exactly.
gonna think, okay, cool, we're still together. This
Yeah,
isn't like,
we're still a thing.
right? I haven't been in jail for 3 years, and you went off with some other dude. I mean, we're still kind of a thing here. That's good.
Right. So he sees this tender moment between Luke and Leia, and he's kind of like, all right. So then he's just eventually he's kind of curious, like, okay, well, what was that all about? Because Luke is running away, and he's probably thinking like maybe she broke the news to Luke, like, you know, me and Hannah are a thing you and I can't be, or something like that.
Right.
And
Look,
that so
my
wasn't
ex
the
has been
case.
defrosted, so kind of got to continue where we left off here.
Yeah, and then so he's hoping for this whole openness in their relationship, and Leia shuts them out. He's like, "Oh, but you could tell Luke though. Like, so what's really going on?" But then she kind of falls in his arms, and that's what I think he kind of realized, like, "Oh, she's still my chick because she's wants me to console her." So you can see Han's frame of mind is kind of confused. And it's
Yeah,
probably
which
looming in the back of his mind until we get to the end of the movie. But it's
absolutely.
probably in the back of his head, like, okay, I
Well,
don't
that's what was so
understand.
funny about the end, right? He's like, listen, Luke gets
Right,
back. I'm not going to stand in the
Jack,
way. She's
I
just
get
like,
it.
it's
No,
not like that.
right.
Which I thought was awesome. And that's true too, is
Yeah.
because right in the middle of this thing, and just think about everything that's been going on around this little point here, that you have this quieter moment, and now they're dropping in this like romantic tension, dramatic kind of a moment that's
Hmm.
adding yet another layer to this film. And I think you're right. I think
Right.
a lot of people either just blow over it or they completely dismiss it. But again, this is adding a lot of complexity to this thing. And it's similar to what they did in Empire Strikes Back when they had more of their, I guess, their weird courtship or whatever, where they were starting to fall for each other in the midst of all this stuff happening to them. So, yeah, I thought that was really cool. And then, of course, yeah, so, this is one of the big scenes. It's key scenes. Probably if I had to, if somebody put a gun to my head and said, okay, what's your favorite scene of the film? And I had to choose, because honestly, there's a lot of great moments. I mean, even the last one we talked about was awesome. One of my
Hmm.
favorites, maybe in my top 3. This is probably still got to be number 1, though, because as I said in the beginning of the show, this is where we see a little bit of vulnerability. This is where we see a little bit of an inkling that Vader actually cares about Luke. There's like it's almost like he feels the need to explain himself. And then, of course, there's that
Yeah.
great line that we were hoping the Obi-Wan series would have. And, maybe it did answer it. I don't know. It was a little vague, but when Luke starts talking about how, there's good in you, I can feel it and all this stuff. And then, Vader just kind of has a bunch of melancholy going, and he wistfully just basically says, Obi-Wan once thought as you do,
Hmm.
and then of course he kind of composes himself and is like, you don't know the power of the dark side. And I think he's in a way pleading, saying, listen, you really don't understand. It's not that I want to be this way. You just don't understand the power. And I don't necessarily even think that he was talking about the power as far as like what he can inflict on people. I think he's really talking about now the internal battle. He thinks
Yeah.
he lost. Like, I don't want to be this way, but you don't understand the power that the dark side has and can consume you, like what Yoda had tried to warn Luke about.
Yeah. And I always thought this was like there's a lot of meat on this bone in this
Mm-hmm.
scene, man, because at different points we've seen as of late, I would say, not necessarily doing Empire, but at post I even say post prequels, you see glimpses of when Anakin is trying to peek out from Vader. You see it once with Ahsoka in Rebels,
Mm-hmm.
right? When he has that standoff where he's like, "We need not be adversaries." He was like, and it's he was trying to plead with her, like, "Okay, I don't want to kill you." That was the Anakin talking, and then when she actually like slashes half his mask, and he calls her out, and he's like, Ahsoka, like it was Anakin trying to reach out, and you could see like Ahsoka was kind of like, okay, is there hope? Is there hope? And then Vader eventually takes over again, and it's just like, nope, you know, you got to die, and it's really that internal struggle that Anakin has been dealing with his pretty much almost most of his life, and it is eventually consumes him. And what's cool about this whole scene here with Luke is once again he's calling out, he's trying to warn Luke about like some things like, look, you just don't understand the power of it. But yet at the same time, you would think because he knows the power of it, he would probably tell Luke to go, to leave, and just, but he still's like, okay, basically my master will teach you the true nature of the force. He's your master now. So it's kind of like, okay, dude, like, what do you want me to do? Like, do you want me to not be consumed by the dark side, or do you want me to be consumed by it? Like, which is it?
Well, yeah, and that's a good point, because we, and again, all the examples that you pointed out, I mean, you can even go back, because technically, even though he wasn't in the suit yet, Anakin was Vader when he tried to give Obi-Wan a chance to go. Like, listen,
Yeah.
you could actually join me if you want. I mean, and even if you don't, just walk away. Walk away and I won't go after you. I mean,
Hmm.
you can see that tug of war, and I think a
Yeah.
lot of it has to do with the fact that, like, listen, we're, yeah, I mean, I hate the Emperor too, but, you know, although it's
Yes,
kind
it
of funny
is.
because you would think, because before, he was trying to get him in Empire to join him. Like, hey, join me and we'll defeat the Empire. If I were Luke, I would have been like, listen, why don't we just go upstairs real quick, knock out the Emperor and then talk about stuff. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
again, it's kind of like, well, he doesn't have to be my master. You just told me like a year ago that if I joined you, we could go defeat him. So let's go defeat
Hmm.
him. I'm a lot more powerful now.
Right.
I
I'm in
mean,
a better position to do it.
right. It's kind of like, you're all looking at my lightsaber going, "Oh, indeed you are powerful." It's like, right. So you remember that thing you said a year ago? Let's go do that. Let's go take him out. And it's,
Right.
I mean, again, these are things that I'm thinking of after the fact too. But,
And I never thought about this, but like that whole scene where, of course, he was brought upon the barge, or not the barge, but the bridge, and the guy's like, he was armed only with this, and then he's like, "Go, good work, Commander. Go bring his companions to me," you know, and he starts having this conversation with Luke, and Luke starts appealing to him, the father in him, like, I know, Father. He kept calling him Father, and
it's a nice
he
tactic.
was really trying to, yeah, nice tactic, trying to appeal to the humanity in the machine.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And when Vader finally ignites the lightsaber, he's like, "I see you constructed the new lightsaber. Your skills are complete. Indeed, you are powerful as the Emperor has foreseen." Like, you have to think about it. When he fought Luke on Bespin, he had to kind of notice that that was his old lightsaber. Because why didn't he?
Yeah, I did. I
Because
know.
it's
I
like, why
thought
would
the
you?
same
Why
thing.
wouldn't you say that? Because how did you know Luke didn't build that one?
Right.
So he's like,
Well,
your
yeah,
skills. He knew Luke. He knew Luke at that time because he could feel in the force. Okay, you're not. You got potential, but you're not there yet. And I know you're not powerful enough to build your own lightsaber. And now I'm seeing that the fact that you have my old one, which means Obi-Wan had to give this to you. Like you could tell Vader kind of put things two and two together and getting, the math is mathing for him. And so at this point, but now he realized, okay, last I saw you, I lopped your hand off, and now you have this new lightsaber, and ironically, it looks like Obi-Wan's lightsaber. So I know you had to have built this. You know what I mean? It's when you really stop and think about the context of Vader's
it's almost like the
statements, you're
whole thing.
like,
Oh, but you can tell Obi-Wan, huh? That's who you.
right?
It's like, listen, I'm your father. I don't care what Obi-Wan said.
Yeah. That
I
name no
hate
longer
him.
has any meaning for
Yeah,
and I
exactly.
love that line that Vader, he's like, I knew he's like, I know you're Anakin Sky, who was once Anakin Skywalker, my father. And Vader quickly turns like that name no longer has any meaning for me. But Luke didn't back down. He was like, no, it's the only nature of your one true self. You've only forgotten it. It's just like
Yeah, well, I
Luke
mean,
is
that was the
definitely
other thing.
he's
He
not
was.
afraid of his
He
dad,
was
and
not. And that was the thing that really just made a huge impact on me, too. It's another reason why I
yeah,
love this scene so much, because it's like, all right, he's kind of talking a little bit. Now, you could also look at it from, well, what choices he have. I mean, in a way, it'd be almost better to make Vader upset enough to want to fight him again rather than go up and see the Emperor, but.
well, yeah. I mean, because you got to think of the confidence Luke has to have. I mean, and I don't know if it's confidence or arrogance, or maybe it's a little bit of both. But you got to think about it. When Luke he turns his back to Vader and
I
is
know.
leaning on the little, you're like, is that what you really want to do? Especially when you hear that it ignites, especially when he's holding your lightsaber, he has
Right.
his own, and you're handcuffed. It's like, now, I mean, you might be able to get the cuffs off, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to taper from him.
Yeah, it's
So
like, look,
you're
man.
kind of taking a risk here, buddy.
Yep.
And then he's
Yep.
kind of telling you, well, that's why you won't take me to your emperor now. Like he's Luke is
Well,
really
and he
brazen in this
probably,
moment.
but again, I think a lot of it though comes from the fact, and again, like we did promise this is a deep analysis, so here you
Hmm.
go. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he felt that stuff, right? Because as the audience member, we're not
Yeah.
necessarily feeling what Luke is. So Luke can probably sense a lot of these things in Vader, and he knows what to say and everything else. And I mean, again, we talked about how one of the things that Luke learned was that, hey, I practiced this with a little droid and it came in handy later. I did this other thing, it came in handy later. So I think he's setting a lot of this stuff up because I think that's part of why Vader ended up turning against the Emperor. He's planting that seed now, probably
Hmm.
because he knows, like, okay, when I go up there, this is probably not going to end well for me. So I
Hmm.
need to try to seed out some light side feelings in Vader now. So when things start to go south for me against the Emperor, it'll pay off, which of course it did. And who knows? You
Hmm.
could even, being that he's a grandson of the Force, maybe the Force is guiding him to say these things. Here, talk back to your dad, that kind of thing. So trust me, it's gonna work later. You're gonna be good. I know you don't want to do it, but
We
just do
got
it.
you. It's fine.
Right. I got you. You're good. Trust me. He probably didn't feel that way when he was being zapped with lightning, but hey. And so, speaking of which, of course, we now really meet the Emperor and all this fun. Now, of course, obviously we saw him in some scenes beforehand, but because he basically flew onto the Death Star
Hmm.
and met up with Vader, and of course there was that whole scene too where we didn't really cover too much, but when Vader was insistent that his son was there and Palpatine didn't sense that. That was a huge
Hmm.
thing because, and I sometimes, and I think Lucas did put this in on purpose, but The idea was that Yoda was now successfully blocking the dark side because Vader only
Mhm.
sensed it because of his connection to him,
Right.
whereas the Emperor didn't sense it at all. So I thought that was kind of cool. So, here we see the Emperor, he's the first thing, of course, you no longer need those. He flips his hand, the cuffs fall off. I mean, you could tell.
Mhm.
You just saw when you entered the room and he started talking, it's like, oh yeah, this guy is like
Yeah.
Vader on steroids.
Yeah, I mean, the music once again supports it, it's
Oh
that
yeah.
very ominous, creepy, just like you feel like you're in the presence of evil.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that the way he's sitting on the throne, his little throne in there, is just kind of like, all right, you know, um, and Vader and Luke are standing side by side right in front of the Emperor, and um, the Emperor, as David likes to call him, the GOAT, is not in the least bit, afraid. He's in full control of the situation right here. Exactly. They're standing before the Emperor in this shot, and they're having this whole dialogue. And, um, you know, Luke is pretty much putting up his best efforts and saying, like, you don't scare me. I'm not worried about you. It's just like, I'm going to kill you. He's like, I'll die and you'll be coming with me, basically. Like, Luke is willing to cash in all the chips in at this point. If it means saving the galaxy, Luke is willing to be that sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole time Vader is kind of nudging him like, dude, chill out. You might
Right.
Vader's kind of like,
It's like,
it's
listen,
pointless to
you
resist,
have no idea. You don't know
Yeah.
what you're talking about. Listen, my kid's kind of stupid. He's never met you, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
right. you know? And you got to feel for it because look, Anakin was a very gifted Jedi, and look at what the Emperor did to him. He probably thinks like,
Yeah.
look, man, I've been there before. I've been trying to look. I've tried to
And
get a bunch of apprentices. None of that
well then
worked.
not only that, but like, there's in times in other books where we've read that how Palpatine kept Vader in check, just
Mm-hmm.
doing stuff to him, sending Vader on these missions to, basically tick him off or, almost kill him just to
Yeah,
see
it's kind of
if he
like,
was
look,
worthy
if you're
enough.
worthy,
So
exactly. Are you worthy enough to be my apprentice? And yeah, so he knows, all this stuff. So you're right. I mean, the Emperor, he's no joke. And of course, what I love too was that whole back and forth between the Emperor and Luke.
yeah, I loved it.
It's kind of
It's
like,
that young guy feeling all brazen, talking to the old man like, yeah, the old man's crazy, whatever. You don't scare me, blah 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 blah. And it's just like, Vader is kind of like that wise older guy's like, you don't want to poke this bear, dude.
it's like, yeah, dude. It's like, think of, you've seen me. That I'm
Right. And this
submitting
guy's
to him.
controlling me.
Yeah, I'm submitting
Right.
to him. You might want to think about that for a second. But I mean, it
Yeah,
was
it's
so
almost
great because you also had almost that name calling that was kind of like, looks all like, well,
hmm
your overconfidence is your weakness, and Emperor's like, well, your faith in your friends is yours, and kind of like, okay, is
Yep.
this gonna descend into your mama jokes?
Right.
I hope not, because Padme and
Vader might.
yeah, Vader
Yeah.
might. Which, by the way, there's some canon comic. I haven't read it, or I don't even know if I have it. I don't know if it's part of my subscriptions, but apparently there's something that's talking about how Dooku killed Shmi.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So, well, no, I'll try to look more into that comic, and so by the time we get to the whole Attack of the Clones thing, where that's more of a relevant conversation. But, I just thought I'd
Gotcha.
throw that out there. Yeah, that's cool. So, obviously, Luke is resisting because one of the things that the Emperor is trying to do is get Luke to use his anger, his fear, his hatred,
hmm
strike me
Yep.
down. You want to do it, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then, of course, there's that super cool scene, which I was almost going to use that as one of our little slides or whatever, where you just see the two lightsabers clash and the Emperor's face is in there and he's laughing and all that
hmm
stuff. Yeah, I thought that
Right.
was just superb. But, it basically leads to the rematch. And
Hmm.
This, as we talked about last time, or we gave a little bit of a foreshadow for tonight, yeah, it's kind of a different, Vader's two-handing it now.
Hmm.
It's a little bit
Yeah,
more of a struggle. I mean, he's not
yeah.
weak, but, it's doesn't really have the upper hand as much as he used to.
Yeah, and part of it, makes me wonder if Vader was truly put up his full might, because
I
at the
don't
same
think
time,
so.
like you said, the fact that he was placing those that Luke was placing those thoughts in Vader's head, you know, and the fact that Vader kept trying to save Luke, like, it's pointless to resist, you know, he just kept trying to tell Luke, like, look, man, I don't want what happened, because he's like, I'm stuck in this suit. I don't want the same thing for you. You know what I mean? Because I know the Emperor will have no qualms in destroying you. That mean he doesn't have any feelings towards you.
Mm-hmm.
So either it's join or die. That's it for him.
Pretty
At
much.
least I'm your father. At least there's that part of me that does still beat for you. And so when you see this rematch, you know, once again, the dialogue, um, Luke kicks Vader down the steps. Vader comes up. He's like, Obi-Wan has taught you well. Once again, he keeps bringing that up. And
Because
then,
Luke keeps having the
he's
high
like,
ground.
right.
Like, yeah, I see
And
what
then,
you're doing up there, buddy.
and then Luke eventually hops up on a little catwalk thing, and Vader tosses his lightsaber at him, because he's like, either you're going to join or you're going to die. And,
Yeah, when
Luke kind
what's
of,
that line, like, then you will face your destiny or whatever. And that was
yeah,
kind
you
of
will
a
meet your
shocking
destiny.
little, yeah, that was a shocking moment. Like, I didn't expect that. And it just kind of cut through the whole, catwalk.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the time that you see it get a little bit more like, okay, Vader means business now, is when he starts really taunting him, like, so you got a sister, huh? Because he can't resist
Yeah.
Vader's mind probes, you know?
Yeah.
Luke's not that powerful yet. Close, but not
Right.
quite, you know?
Exactly.
And then he was like, if you can't be turned, then perhaps she can. And it's just like, Luke just loses it at that point. I mean, just
Yep,
completely
that was the
loses it.
button.
That was the
That
one.
was the button.
And it was cool too because, and this of course goes back a little bit to the whole failure at the cave, and everything that we saw in Empire was because Luke was looking at his black glove, which kind of resembles Vader's, and he sees some of the mechanical parts of his hand, and just kind of looking down
And
at
he's looking at
Vader, and
Vader's,
yeah, kind of looking
yeah.
at himself, going, "Uh-oh." Kind of
But
like
he
that
saw how
failure at the
easy it
cave.
was. He saw how easy it was for him to slip into that, because he felt
Yep.
how powerful he became.
Yep.
And then he kind of snapped back to reality and realized, like, okay, I need to back off, because I could see myself turning into my father very quickly. And I know that's what they want me to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I mean, it goes from there, obviously, and then we have the flip side of this. There's like a million different things I could have put, because this is really one of the most epic space battles still
Oh yeah.
in movie
Yeah.
history. But one of the things that I thought was really hilarious, you just have essentially the space battle from A New Hope, but on steroids. But then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, when the Death Star starts firing up and picking off ships and stuff, you're just like,
Jeez, yeah.
oh, yeah, this is a little bit of a different thing, I mean, you're not really used to that. You don't, and of course, that's the whole thing, is that the Emperor's just kind of like, and this is part of how he was trying to turn Luke, right? He was trying to create this hopeless situation for his friends, which we see this tactic reused at the end of Rise of Skywalker, where it's just like, okay, now witness the fully operational, whatever status of the
Yeah.
station or whatever the line is. And I mean, that's the
Battle
thing.
station.
Yeah. And again, they're falling in, the Emperor is the excellent strategist. And, if you guys want a deep dive into that, we have one. You go back on our channel, we actually have an entire show dedicated to what made the Emperor so powerful. Like, how did he get to where he was? And it was a pretty good show.
Right.
I mean, for some weird, odd reason, it got a million dislikes on YouTube, right? It's got like 2 likes and, you know, but it was a really good informative thing because, and this is probably why I think maybe it didn't land with some people, is because it's not the obvious. I think a lot of people may have expected us to go into, well, how did he become a Sith Lord? And, how did he get so powerful that way? But that's not really what made the Emperor so powerful. I mean, it was, but wasn't the only thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is
Yeah,
a
I mean,
really
this
cool
massive
space
space battle was really cool. You
Massive.
got Lando kind of leading the charge here. He's in the Falcon. He's, before even this, Han kind of had some words with Lando, like, look, all right, make sure my ship is all right, you know. And so I mean, it was just really cool to see Lando actually, piloting the Falcon and doing some cool stuff too, because Lando's not a shabby pilot himself.
No, and it
And
used to be his ship.
true story. True
And it was,
story.
you're
And
right.
yeah.
I mean, that was a good thing that we, to go back to that, because that was a really cool scene too, is that, you get to see a little bit of that friendship between
Mm-hmm.
Lando and Han, and it was nice to see them jumping back on good terms again. There's this chat here from David. He says, "Are you a Jedi or a Sith at heart? I'm Dracula when he was." I think he means when he was fighting to
Dooku.
contain the darkness within him. When Luke was training and saw himself in the helmet, it hit my soul. What about you guys? I mean, in real life, a Jedi, obviously. Now, I will say this: when I play RPG games, I'm usually kind of what if you were playing in the D&D world, kind of like either chaotic neutral or lawful evil for any D&D players out there. Because usually I'll play this like kind of rogue assassin, almost kind of like a Mandalorian style, where you're kind
Mm-hmm.
of it's like, okay, well, whatever's going to get me ahead in this particular situation, I'm going to do type of thing,
So why would you say, like, okay, at heart you're a Jedi?
Well, I mean, um,
I mean, I
there's
know you, but
well, there's a number of reasons. I mean, one, I mean, being a Christian and all, I mean, I think that a lot of the Jedi, you said that a lot, we talked
philosophy.
about all the time that a lot of the Jedi philosophies and stuff are very biblical in nature. So, I mean, there's
Sure.
that element of it. But then there's also, which of course is all in there too. But I mean, beyond that, I think that when you start to see the two disciplines, you see how self-destructive being a Sith becomes, right? And then, of course, the Jedi understand the value of patience. They understand the value of pretty much, of course, there's in the world of Star Wars, it's really interesting too, because they end up becoming too dogmatic in some of their ways. Like, not the
Mm-hmm.
philosophy so much, but just in how they act it out, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
was what we'll probably get a lot deeper into that when we do Revenge of the Sith.
Right.
But I mean,
I think for me, um, hmm, I think it's at this juncture in life, I kind of lean more towards the Sith side. Um,
that's
Not
what
so
David
much that
said.
like yeah, I mean, it's just I think that I think I don't really see I won't say anything. There are some things about the Sith that of course I vehemently disagree with, like as far as hatred and stuff like that. And and jealousy and things like that. However, their craving power, I I think it's okay. I think you should in a way, and their desire to be dominant is considerable. I just feel like there's sometimes they just go too far with it sometimes. So, I mean, in a perfect world, I will. more so be like a dark Jedi or a gray Jedi, if you will. Like Mace Windu is kind of like a happy medium because he uses the dark side on occasion. Because I feel like sometimes, like you said, Eric, like the Jedi are too dogmatic in their ways sometimes, and so I feel like um
Yeah,
sometimes
well,
force does need to be used, and
the
sometimes you
the
need to use it
Anakin
in a way that
philosophy. See
yeah,
what
like
Anakin was trying to do, and I mean, if left to his own devices, I think he would have been more the gray Jedi because it was really Palpatine that was pushing him to the extremes. But
yeah,
even when he was, talking a little dark, that when he was freaking Padme out again, we'll get to this in Attack of the Clones, but when he's all like, well, everybody should just maybe one person should make the decision, all this stuff, just like, whoa, slow down here. You're kind of freaking me out. But everything that Anakin was trying to do, he was trying to do it for good. He wasn't actually
right,
trying to do it out of selfishness. He was trying to make
right.
the world better. He just thought that he can make the world better himself.
And that's the way Dooku kind of was as well. But I
Mm-hmm.
think like with the Sith, or at least with Anakin, I could see a lot of myself in that because take that episode of Clone Wars where they were trying to get information from that one snail looking dude, and he wasn't giving up the information, but it's like they're on a timeline. Like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
have time to sit here and negotiate with you. Tell me what I need to know. And it's just like, and instead of going through the whole due process where it's like, okay, this whole thing could, you know, okay, you know what? Shortcut. I'm gonna force choke you. Yeah, I bet you tell me now, won't you? It's like, okay, it could have been easy, but you wanted to make things difficult. So it's like
Well,
sometimes I feel
especially in
like
a
you do
war
need to
situation,
use
which you have to
yeah,
remember that they were in the middle of the Clone Wars too, and that's why
exactly.
soldiers have to,
So
have to follow some different rules than maybe the police do.
mhm.
And actually, the other theme in going, which kind of brings us to our next thing, actually, because there's some overarching themes that really present themselves.
Mhm.
Obviously there's a good versus evil. There's
Right.
the different philosophies and how the extremes of these philosophies are really what made them dangerous. And then of course now you have the primitive versus the high tech. And there were a lot of allegories to the Vietnam War in this stuff. And this was one of them where Lucas, of course, observing that, the Vietnamese with who didn't have anywhere near the technology that we did, but yet they
Mhm.
were able to defeat us in a lot of cases. This is
Sure.
one of those things that, you know, the Empire is basically losing to a bunch of overgrown teddy bears. But what they were doing
Mhm.
was they were using the land, they were using their knowledge of the land, they were using tactics that the Empire wasn't familiar with, really.
Guerrilla warfare.
Guerrilla
Yep.
warfare, exactly. So I mean that's
Yeah.
another theme that I think it's important to bring that up whenever you're discussing Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because I had this conversation with my grandfather because, he loves Return of the Jedi. That's one of his favorites, and I made a comparison to him, and it never dawned on him at first until I
Mhm.
kind of showed it to him. And
Mhm.
my grandfather, being a Vietnam vet, when I kind of explained it to him, he was like, "You know what? I never thought of this, but you're absolutely right.
Now he's
This
got
is
like
totally
PTSD, can't watch it anymore.
right now. Teddy bears are
You
rivals Viet
completely,
Cong all
yeah,
of a sudden."
you completely ruined it for him. It's kind of like, well, I never really thought about it that way. I'm never watching that movie again.
Yeah, I hate it now. I'm gonna hate this now.
Right, exactly. Throwing out the tapes or whatever. But yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
But yeah, and that's one of the things that was really cool is because you're fighting them on their turf, and they know the land, they know what's out there, and they're using their ways of circumventing your
Hmm.
technology. And I
Yeah,
thought that was really,
that was really
creative. Some of
cool.
it was a bit
A
over the
little,
top,
and don't
but it's
forget
like
that part of it helped when they actually captured the Scout Walker. So I mean, wasn't like it was
true.
completely logs and stones and all that. It's like, yeah, we captured a
Right.
Scout Walker and used the technology against you, but
Right, exactly.
there was a lot of that, and I mean, I thought that it was kind of a cool. And plus, when we look at Star Wars, we just think the whole thing is like way more advanced than us, but it's kind of reminding you that yeah, there are some more primitive cultures in this universe. And then of course, we're
Mm,
flipping back, the
to
whole
the goat.
battle thing is over, I mean, Luke basically is just kind of like throwing down his lightsaber after, he's looking at his mechanical hand going, "You know what? I don't want this path." And he's like, "I'm a Jedi, like my father before me," and you know, and then of course,
Yeah,
so
makes
be
this whole
it, Jedi.
right. He makes this whole he drew his line in the sand pretty much,
Mhm.
and Luke was like, okay, you know what? You're not gonna turn me. This is where I stand. It's mano y mano at this point. So Emperor's like, fine, you know. So Vader's
And
still
then and then
hand
the
over there,
Emperor,
but
well, what kills me is, and once again, you got to put yourself in, 1983, because now if you were to watch this for the first time, you'd be like, "Oh, okay, this is Force lightning." Back then, we're like, "Well, what's this now?" You
yeah, when I
know?
was a kid and I saw him do that, because I was like, well, I thought he was about to do some force push or something like that. And I saw lightning flying out there. So I was like, whoa, like, is he Storm from the X-Men now? Like, how
I know. It's like,
okay,
is
what the
this
heck
this
is
is a
this?
thing? And now you're thinking
Right.
in terms of why didn't anybody else use this? It's kind
Exactly.
of
And it's
like,
like, okay,
okay.
well, this is why he's the Emperor, because he's
Mm-hmm.
and I see what kept Vader in line because your whole suit's mechanical. Yeah. I can see how that can be a
Yeah.
problem.
And of course, David does say, because he's the greatest of all time. Yeah. So,
Right.
I mean, this is a pretty cool thing. And of course, as this is going on, yeah, you're thinking, like, okay, there's just no way in the world that, he's going to survive this. And Vader kind of composes himself and he standing next to the Emperor. And I thought the scene was really cool how, you know, I think it would have been fine if the Emperor hadn't kept taunting Luke, being so hateful about it, and it's kind of like, when he was saying lines before, like, you, like your father, are now mine, and all this stuff, and it just kind of,
Hmm. Young
it's,
fool. Only
Vader is
now
just
in the end do you understand.
exactly,
Like
yeah, right, and Vader's kind of
his
looking
lines are
back, you pay for your lack of vision, and he's just so hateful about it,
good.
and I think Vader is starting to reflect on his own. Well, like, oh yeah, I remember when you kind of railroaded me with the whole Padme thing. It's, I mean,
Hmm.
he's looking back at Luke, and of course, Luke is like, "Father, help me, please." In other words, like, oh, I hope the seeds that I planted back in that corridor or whatever are starting to pay off just a little bit, maybe. You know?
Well, yeah, and what made this so poignant is that we get the payoff of that, and we get to the prequels, but
Right,
the
right.
whole time Anakin was trying to save the ones he loved.
Yes,
He
yes.
tried to save his mother.
Mm-hmm.
He failed at that. Or he wasn't there enough time to save his mother. He tried to save Padme, couldn't save Padme. So now he finds out, like, okay, I have this one chance now to save my son.
Yep.
And what am I going to do? Now, I will say, I hate this is when my Sith part comes out. I hate the
I'll be patient with
because
you.
I don't think it was right. I see what you did there. I don't think it was a special edition, but I think it was like as another version when they put Vader, because with him looking back and forth, and then he's like, no, no. I hated that.
Oh, I know.
I hate that version.
Yeah, it was
I
so
love
stupid.
the original version that I watched as a kid when you just see him looking back and forth, and then you hear those timpanis that do that roll, and Vader just turns and just looks and just snatches the Emperor, and yeah, this is what you get. When Vader just scoops him up pretty much one-handed because he lost his other hand. So he's got him in the hand and a little nub, and he just launches, Palpatine down the shaft. He gives Palpatine the shaft pretty much. And like that was just such a powerful moment, you know, because the whole time Vader's being electrocuted because Palpatine's still unleashing this lightning out, and Vader's is hitting Vader, but he still has enough in him to carry him over to this little reactor and launch him down into the stupid thing.
Yeah, and I mean it's
So
really cool
yeah.
that, because like you're alluding to there is the fact that Vader knew he was probably going to die. It's
Hmm.
not just a question of, okay, I'm disobeying my master and man, I better be sure. I better get this on the first shot because, if he
Hmm.
recovers from this, I'm in a little bit of
Yeah.
trouble here,
Yeah.
but
Exactly.
he also knows that in all probability, because he's seen look, he witnessed the battle with Mace. I mean, when Mace was deflecting it, Palpatine has a really hard time, as we've seen in all these films. He can't shut himself off, right?
Right.
The Mace thing, even though it's scarring up his face, he's still shooting it. In this, he's still shooting it, although this is the one time that it actually achieved something for him. And then in The Rise of
Hmm.
Skywalker, again, Ray's deflecting it, he's still shooting it. It's like, dude, stop. It's
Right.
I mean, the Mace thing, it actually was eventually going to help him with his deception, but, you know, maybe you might want to
Well,
just learn to shut that off.
well, that's the thing about him is that he felt like he was so powerful that no one should be able to withstand him, and so he's like, okay, you keep pouring it on, I'm gonna keep pouring it on. Like no one should be, because he even did it with Yoda. Like
Yeah,
Yoda,
yeah, that's
and
true. That's
he's
true.
doing it with Yoda, and Yoda absorbed it. Like, yeah. So it's just like I think Palpatine just constantly thinks that okay, I'm stronger than you. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can't. You're eventually going to succumb to me. It's just a matter of when. And sometimes, a lot of times, that ended up being his undoing.
Yeah, so I mean, it was really cool that, Vader actually sacrificed himself. And then, then of course we get the big moment, which I admit I cried in the theater when, Vader eventually dies. But,
Hmm.
when he's now you get that sort of like he's back to Anakin kind of thing, Luke, help me take this mask off. And of course, Luke is like, well, you'll die if I do that. And he's just basically like, well, nothing can prevent that. So
Yeah.
it's like, look, man, it's pretty much over for me at this point. I want to look at you with my own eyes. I was just like, even at 12, I kind of lost it at that because you're so used to seeing this guy be like completely evil. And then he
Well,
says
and when he
something like
said that
that.
line, even when he said that line, you have to take it in twofold, because you know he meant physically with my own eyes, but then he also meant like
Oh, through as Anakin, not Vader kind of thing?
as Anakin, like Vader. You know what I'm saying? I want to see
Mhm.
you as my, from a different place. And I think that's what was really, moving. Um, the other part of it was just that I wasn't prepared. Like, when he starts taking this helmet off, because even the way they shot this, right? He takes the top part off, the little flat part. He removes that, and then you see like the computer chips on the top of his head. And I was like, okay. And then and they still they don't give you the reveal yet. He's pulling the back of it off first, and you're just like, as a kid, I'm like, okay, what does he look like? What does he look like? What does he look
I
like?
know.
I did not expect him to look like this, honestly.
No, me
One.
neither.
Then two, I wasn't prepared for his voice to sound like that. Because I thought, you know, I thought that was just his actual voice, not the suit was creating that voice for him. So I
Mhm.
was expecting this booming, deep voice, and it's like, you were right about me. He's barely, it's like,
You
what?
sounded
Like
Jewish.
that's
You sounded like an old Jewish
yeah.
dude. That would have been great
Yeah,
if he had
exactly.
taken the mask off and it was like James Earl Jones in there.
That would have been awesome.
It's like, well,
They've
Luke,
been kind of taught to explain, like, as far as how he's his
yeah,
father,
I'm
but
your father. It's like, well, DNA works a little different in the Star Wars universe, but
yeah, exactly.
well, and I
But
mean, and
yeah,
the thing too is that when we did, I keep referencing all our old shows. You guys should really go back and watch some of these shows that we did. When David Prowse, the guy who had originally played the physical version of Vader, he didn't do the voice, but he did the physical version. He was originally supposed to be unmasked in this scene,
hmm
but unfortunately, he had a falling out with Lucas during the thing. One of the things was, I guess he accidentally revealed the whole Vader being Luke's father thing during the press of Empire, or before it came out or something. There was a bunch of stuff where there's even scenes, and I hadn't known. I only found this out maybe a couple of years ago. there are actually scenes where he basically it wasn't David Prowse in the suit. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Let me get to this thing from David really quick. So David basically says Vader is ugly. Okay, just put it right out there. Keep in mind, in universe, this guy like fell in lava. Just keep that in mind.
Just saying.
Yes, this is my first time seeing his face, and it's anticlimactic. They could have hired a better looking guy. Look, dude, this isn't like, Brad Pitt playing Darth Vader. He fell in lava.
Yeah, it's not right.
And then he's cooped up in this little helmet. I mean, I'm just glad that when they peeled that thing off, that you didn't see like slime or something from his skin, adhering to it.
Yeah. His honestly, I mean, because at the time, as a kid, seeing it, I didn't know how he ended up in the suit in the first place. I had no idea. So you all had that prior knowledge, I guess. But
Yeah, because
I had no knowledge that.
Well, it's like I
because you
covered
guys
in the
had
New
comics
Hope.
and books.
Well, it wasn't even that. I mean, it was honestly, it was interviews that Lucas did. He basically just revealed this stuff. And, it wasn't even a lava planet at that time. It was kind of like they were, the way Lucas explained it in like 78, it was like kind of on a mountain thing or something, and he fell, and Obi-Wan beat him, and he fell into lava, and then he hated Obi-Wan after that. And so, it kind of tracks what Lucas eventually did, but yeah.
Yeah, but for me, I didn't have that context. So I'm just thinking like, okay, because I was wondering like how he got the scars and stuff and the burns and stuff on this. I mean, honestly, he looks surprisingly well for a person who fell in the lava. But
That's what I
especially when you see the end of Revenge of the Sith, you
yes.
see, I mean, that back to tank did some wonders for them.
Wonders. Well, he kept jumping in it every 5 minutes. He was in it almost as much as Boba Fett was. Well, he had more of a reason, I guess, but
yeah, more of a reason too. Yeah, definitely. So
yeah.
All
right. Well, after that, of course, we get the destruction of Death Star 2, which looks vaguely like the destruction of Death Star 1. But this time it was nice to actually see it was nice to see Lando actually get a moment in the sun. It was him, another X-Wing combo. Was that Wedge that was with him? I'm not really entirely sure. I thought so.
Yep.
So, yeah. It was cool. Him and, of course, Nien Nunb, who was in the Falcon with him as his co-pilot. That was a really cool thing, I thought. And it was exciting. And what I really enjoyed was it wasn't too derivative of the first, the whole trench run thing and all that stuff. I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and they had to kind of beat it out of there because basically, like, I mean, once you pop that little reactor, man, you had to book it out of there, man.
And that was so spectacular too when you saw that just reactor just fall, and then it just, I'm like, man, that was pretty sweet, actually.
And if the flames actually coming behind the Falcon, and
I know,
engulfs it a little bit, and then it spits it out. Yeah, it was sweet. It kind of reminded me of the scene from Independence Day when they blew up when Will Smith and
Jeff Goldblum.
Bill had to get I kept calling on Bill tonight. Jeff Goldblum, they had to fly out of the mothership.
It was probably influenced by this scene, I'm sure.
Oh, it had to have been. I mean, it's the same thing because they had to blow up the core, the center of the.
Sure,
absolutely. It had to.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was awesome. Like you said, to see Lando with his moment in the sun, that was cool, and we had it was a bigger explosion this time because the first one kind of exploded and it was kind of like it looked like a bunch of glitter, but this one was like, as you can see, like this like an atomic bomb went off, which essentially that's kind of what happened. Like a nuke just got imploded.
I don't know, man. I think that this is like a special edition kind of thing too, because the whole like ring thing. I don't know if that was in the original or not. I know they did a special edition thing with the original, right? Because they added the ring after the fact, right? It looked like a bunch of glitter went off or something, but Even this, I think it was modified. Let's put it that way.
Right.
All right. So then, of course, our heroes are reunited eventually. They're all basically coming together as this big celebration. Now, this is the one thing I thought the special edition did right. When
Yeah.
they started
I know where you're
showing
going.
all the planets, that we had seen in the prequels, and
Mm-hmm.
the celebration pretty much around the galaxy, because I always thought at the end of this movie that it was a little too claustrophobic. It's kind of like, okay, the Empire just essentially was destroyed. Palpatine's gone. Vader's gone. Okay, I get it that we're following this particular group of people, but you think that you would want to show the scope of what that means for the galaxy. And I thought the
Right.
special edition did a great job with that.
Yeah, this was actually in, before the Death Star blew up, Luke drags Vader onto a shuttle and gets out of there
Mm-hmm.
before the thing blows up, which thankfully that happened.
Yeah.
Then, and of course, down on, Endor, Leia and Han had that whole conversation about, I'm sure Luke made it out before it blew. If he comes back, I won't get in the way. And that's when she reveals to him, like, no, it's not like that at all. He's my brother. And then the look on Han's face was priceless. He was just like,
I
what?
know. He was so
But
happy.
yeah, but happy at the same time. But then, what was cool about this is that before Luke joins up with the rest of his merry band, he gives his father a Jedi burial,
Mm-hmm.
somewhat.
Yeah.
He does the whole cremation thing. Even though he still brings the Vader suit, I mean, the helmet and everything with it, it's still like he builds a pyre and he lays his father to rest, and he kind of has that moment of saying, like, goodbye. And then
Mm-hmm.
it was really, really touching because now he reunites with, he's like kind of like the last one to kind of show back up. And everybody's like, oh, happy to see him. And he hugs everybody. And then we get, the special moment where he joins up with the rest of his Jedi influencers. And he kind of sees, here we go, no one really dies. Now we have Obi-Wan, Yoda, and there's Anakin. Him being in Anakin form and returning to the light side. So that was the true moment of redemption right there. So that was
Right. Now, that's one of the
a really
reasons
cool
why I
moment.
chose this one instead of the original, which actually had the dude that we basically saw in the suit.
Right. See, David, Anakin's not a bad looking guy.
Yeah. That's kind of the pre-lava Anakin right there.
Right.
So, I mean, and that was cool. And that was a really nice moment. And one of the reasons why I brought this, because we could have just mentioned it, but this is the first time that we start to really, now you're getting this Force Ghost thing, right? Because up until this point, you only think it's just Obi-Wan that does this stuff. Like maybe he found a way to do it or whatever. But now you realize, like, no, this is kind of like a Jedi thing, right?
Yeah, how Jedi live on. Yeah.
Right. And even though Vader was a Sith and, he killed younglings and did all that, of course, we'll get into that soon, right? Next couple of weeks. But he basically returned to the light side, so now he becomes a Force ghost as well. So it was worth noting that this is kind of the first real prominent use of, hey, look, there's more than just Obi-Wan here, and it was a nice reunion or whatever. And then, of course, they had the whole Ewok celebration, which I still prefer what's known as the Yub Nub song in the beginning.
Yes.
But even though I'm not as nuts about the song they use in the special edition, I do like the fact that they went through and
All the different
showed,
planets and showed.
yeah, all the different planets, especially because we had seen it now, in the prequels. Because there was actually two versions of the special edition. There was a 97 one, and then they released one, later on or whatever when it came to DVD and Blu-ray. So, yeah, it's, again, overall, Return of the Jedi, look, this is the holy grail of Star Wars that we're talking about here. This is really simple. Yeah. You'll see us get a little bit more temperamental in the weeks to come. because we're going to be doing the prequels. Probably more so when we do the sequels, but the prequels are when some questionable decisions were made, and
Right.
some things start to fall apart. But it's really easy to deal with, the original trilogy, because this is basically, like I said, this is the epitome of what Star Wars should be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's um this was a great culmination of a story. From the growth and development from Luke, Han, and Leia, collectively and individually, uh, throughout the saga, and then we get the big payoff. We get Vader's redemption. We get to see Yoda and Obi one more time, and all back together. It's literally like one of those, everyone lives happily ever after, pretty much. Han gets the girl. Luke becomes who he is supposed to be. His hero's journey has uh, kind of come to a solid point where he's fulfilled his destiny in becoming a Jedi and actually redeeming not only just beating Vader, but also redeeming his father. Um, and you can almost kind of wonder, like, did Yoda and Obi-Wan know that? Like, not only are we he needs to beat Vader, but he needs to redeem his father. I wonder if that was ever in the cards and they just never said anything. Or was that just like a happy benefit to, look their saga? So yeah, all in all, that's Return of the Jedi. That's the original trilogy, ladies and gentlemen. The Holy Grail, as Eric once called
Well,
it.
yeah, and the only thing that I really want to add to that is just that I think one of the mistakes that people make with Return of the Jedi is that people tend to forget that, in addition to some of the comedy, in addition to some of the more high action moments, because again, this movie in general is a lot lighter in tone than Empire Strikes Back. It's a little bit more fun. It has a little bit more of the fun of the first movie, although there are some juxtaposed dark scenes whenever we do the Emperor and Luke and Vader and all that stuff. It's a little bit of high tension and a little darker, which is a little bit jarring at first. I mean, you got to admit, you're going from the Ewoks and, he's eating a little candy bar or whatever it is that that Leia left. And then all of a sudden you switch back and it's this really heavy scene between the Emperor. And I mean, that was a little jarring at first, but it was amazing. And I think that finally, I just want to add that there's a lot of really quiet, good story moments in this. We brought up the scene between Luke and Leia when he's revealing that she's the sister. The scene between Luke and Yoda when he's being a little bit more fatherly to a degree and treating Luke a little bit more as an equal. The scene, of course, between Obi-Wan and Luke having that conversation. The scene between Vader and Luke having sort of a quiet conversation. So, I mean, there's a lot of moments that I think people overlook and tend to skip. So I just think that that's a really important thing to bring up before we close out our Return of the Jedi discussion.
Yeah, you kind of stole my thunder on that one, but it's all right. That's what the Emperor does. Got your own lightning. um, but to add to that, though, I think Return of the Jedi to me was I would liken it to good gumbo. You have a bunch of different things in there that add so much flavor to the saga, and I think the mixture of the levity, the drama, the action, the quiet moments, like all those things kind of wrapped into Revenge of the Sith. I mean, not Revenge of the Sith. Return of the Jedi was so good because nothing was too much. It was, to me, the right mixture of everything.
Yeah.
To where it's like, okay, I can digest this and it's good. It's warm. It gives you that good feeling after you're done. It's like, okay, I feel satisfied. And that's what it was for me. And everything that you just said about the quiet moment, that was my other big point was, yeah, the quiet moments were really well done. They were well placed. The the pacing of the movie was good. You when our heroes were in danger, you felt it when they were when it was meant to be funny, it was funny. It wasn't over the top. It was you got the wisdom, the technology, and it was awesome. They advanced it to a point. All of it. It was just like I said, good gumbo for me.
So, I mean, obviously we got to rate this thing. So, what are you going to give it?
I'll say 9.5.
Yeah, I'll go there too. I mean, it's well, I don't know. What did I give Empire Strikes Back? I mean, I don't remember. I don't even know if we rated those. Did we rate that
I don't know
one?
if we rated it. If I give Empires, if I had to give Empire rating, I would give that one a 10. Just simply because, and I base it on based upon what it's supposed to do, and that's how I kind of did my rating. Like, what was the intent of the movie? The intent of the movie of Empire was to really, advance the characters. It was supposed to be dark. It did it well. It definitely gave us a good cliffhanger. It made us want more. It hit all the beats that it was supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's
in
how I even
fact,
feel with Return of the Jedi. It's the same way. It just, yes, there might have been some minor things like, okay, there might have been, that wasn't, I could have done without that, here and there. But that's why I gave it the 9.5. But it's pretty much right up there. I think it was a perfect bookend to that saga.
it was, and I mean, I have to, because really, if the way that I would rate it from a filmmaker's perspective is different from how I would rate it as, an audience member and
True.
just from a more of a story perspective, right? Because, like, from a filmmaker's perspective, I would still give Empire a 10, but I would
Hmm.
probably give A New Hope a 9.5, and then Return of the Jedi maybe an 8 or 9.
Right.
Whereas from a story perspective, it's almost like I would flip flop that. Empire still gets a 10. Return of the Jedi probably gets a 9.5, and then New Hope gets a 9. And it's mostly because, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the New Hope. I could give a New Hope a 9.5 too. It's just, you watch it and I mean, a lot of that's rewatchability.
I think Return of the Jedi had more layers to it versus
Well,
A New
that's
Hope, and
it.
that's what
That's it.
that's why I
Right.
gave it the 9.5, because it's
Right.
the first one is you're establishing everything, so
Right.
you
But I
know
mean, it's almost like, do you punish something because it's establishing, because it's doing what it's supposed to do in a trilogy? You
well,
know
it's
what I'm
not.
saying?
Well, I don't view it as a punishment. Like I said, I think it does
Well, if
what
you're
it
giving
needs
it
to
a 9
do.
instead of a 9.5, it's kind of a punishment. If you're going, well, this one has more layers than this, so I'm gonna grade it lower. That's
Well, I just think that there's more complexity to it. It's kind of like,
but part of that
um,
is where it falls in the story too, though.
yeah. I think it's my own biasness into it as well.
Well, that's
Like I
it, and that's
just,
what I'm talking about. It's like, what would you do from a filmmaker's perspective versus I mean, what you like,
well,
what you enjoy. Because
yeah.
yeah, we're all gonna want to see the gang going on an adventure versus like, oh man, I gotta watch these guys meet each other again. Especially after because the first movie in any franchise, whether it's a trilogy or it's got like 17 things like Bond or something,
Hmm.
first movie is always gonna be the one where it only works one time. It only works once because once the next movie comes out, now when you go back, it's no longer, you have more information. And so
Yeah, I
now
mean,
you're just not going to enjoy it as much.
I think A New Hope. I The technical aspects of, like you said, I think it's definitely higher because it's the first of its kind. You never seen anything like that before,
Mhm.
and although they pushed the envelope and the story was great, I think, they refined all that throughout the duration of the films because, you got Vader sounding like Commander, tear the ship apart and blah, 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 blah. And then now you get that booming, warm, buttery sound of James Earl Jones the way it was intended, like in Empire and Return of the Jedi. It's like
Right. Versus talking
you
through a paper towel tube or something.
exactly, and it's just like, okay, you don't have Obi-Wan's lightsaber fizzling out. Now everybody's lightsaber works all the way through the battle. You know what I mean? there's things you
It's
can
the little
nitpick at
things, really.
right. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's things you could pick at all of them, but
Yeah, and I mean, and again, that's one of the reasons why, you know, I mean, filmmakers' perspective, New Hope goes a little bit ahead of Return of the Jedi with a 9.5,
sure.
versus a 9. But from an audience, hey, I'm consuming this content standpoint, A New Hope then goes below Return of the Jedi for all those reasons that you talked about. Not to mention the fact that there's just more to unpack in that movie. There's more lore that you're getting. There's more. It's just a more enjoyable watch. I mean, it's just better viewing. I mean, what can you say? But of course, it's not about us. It's about you guys. If after 3 hours you're still with us,
right.
let us know what you guys think in the comments. I mean, you saw what Ronaldo thought in the live chat, but what are you guys thinking about? What do you guys think about any of the points that we made? Where would you put Return of the Jedi among the original trilogy as far as a rating system? There's a bunch of stuff. David's still here, he's saying. There's a bunch of stuff that you guys can, comment on, weigh in on. And of course, we answer all of it. If you like this video, make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed, because there's more What is Star Wars content to come. Next week from tonight, we're going to be talking about The Phantom Menace. We're finally going to go back now into the prequel trilogy, and we're going to analyze that and talk about the good and the bad on that one. And then, of course, Friday, you can always look forward to, at least for the next 16 or 15 weeks now, Bad Batch Season 2. The new episode's coming out in a couple of days, and Friday we're going to go through it, review it, talked about what we like, what we didn't like, and hopefully chat with you guys live. So be sure to join us. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.